Chapter 969. Pa! Lin Xiao slapped his hand away impatiently and took a step to the side. Frowning, she stared at him and said, "Tisk, you're really not leaving? Do you really want to do it that badly?" Wu Chungyue sounded as if he wasn't satisfied. Wu Chungyue was stunned for a moment, then looked at her with a smile. Lin Xiao looked at him calmly, then her eyes suddenly flashed. She nodded and said, "All right, you want to do it, right? Sure, go wash me up and wait on the bed." It seemed that this guy in front of her was dead set on Lin Hao's words and was determined to take advantage of her. According to his personality, even if she could reject him today or tomorrow, he would come over every night to annoy her. Wasn't it just doing it? So be it. It wasn't like she hadn't done it before. Seeing that he had provided a lot of energy for little man in the past 2 months, she would serve him once. Seeing Lin Xiao's sudden change in attitude, Wu Chungyue was stunned for a moment. Then he was overjoyed. His eyes flashed with a hint of bright light. "I've washed up, my body is very clean," he said with a smile. He even took off the nightgown on his shoulders, revealing half of his naked upper body. His well-defined and strong chest muscles and the solid muscles on his arms faintly revealed a sense of strength. Lin Xiao looked at his healthy wheat-colored skin and couldn't help but feel that it was dazzling. "Go wash again." She was a little annoyed, but when she saw the other's smiling eyes, she felt even angrier. Okay. Go wait for me." Wu Qingyue was happy now, so he was very obedient to her request. After responding, he winked at Lin Xiao, then turned around and walked towards Lin Xiao's bathroom. Lin Xiao. She was going blind. This man's style changed again. Now he looked like a hooligan. Lin Xiao held her waist as she sat on the sofa, rubbing her stomach and sighing. She didn't know when this child would come out. She looked up in the direction of the bathroom, and her eyes darkened. She didn't have a deep relationship with this man. Back when she was still the leader of Pluto, she had only seen him a few times in Wuxia. At that time, he also had a gentle smile on his face. However, he maintained a very distant and polite distance, giving people a contradictory feeling that he was clearly easy to get close to, but in fact, he was rejecting people. At that time, she had never thought that they would end up like this. If she hadn't been pressured by D Long and the other 2 bases, she wouldn't have thought of cooperating with him and asking for his help. He didn't expect to have a new identity and a new body. The original owner not only kidnapped someone else's daughter and ran away, but also had sex with her. Not only that, but he didn't even return the girl's daughter and died just like that. She had to deal with this mess the moment she woke up. A huge pit. Now she had 1 foot in the pit. She couldn't pull it out even if she wanted to, because Wu Qingyue was holding her. What's more, he didn't expect that his heart, which he had clearly planned to seal off, would now show signs of stirring. Every time he thought of this, Lin Xiao's heart would ache. Very soon, Wu Qingyue came out again with a wave of dampness. Furthermore, he wasn't wearing any clothes. As soon as he raised his head, he saw a slender and muscular male body and something between his legs. Lin Xiao immediately closed his eyes. Damn, his eyes stung. Although she had seen his body, it was still very dangerous to walk towards her like this, okay? Wu Qingyue's head was covered with a towel, and he walked out openly while wiping his hair. He walked directly to Lin Xiao's bedroom with a smile, and when he passed by her sofa, he glanced at her with a smile. "I'll wait for you." Lin Xiao looked up at him expressionlessly, and inexplicably felt that she had dug a pit. Watching the man disappear at the door of her bedroom, Lin Xiao's eyes twitched. After a minute of silence, she finally stood up and went to the bathroom. As soon as she entered the bathroom, a damp and cold steam mixed with the man's scent filled the air. She didn't need to breathe, but she felt that the man's scent was drilling into her body from her nose. She took off her clothes and turned on the shower. The water poured down from her head, and the cold water washed over her skin. Lin Xiao didn't feel cold, but felt very comfortable. Other than the fact that she couldn't casually shower outside the base, when she returned to the base, Lin Xiao would basically shower every day. When she was at Wu Qingyue's house, she also had to shower every day. After washing off the bubbles, Lin Xiao put on a large bathrobe. Just like Wu Qingyue, she took a towel and rubbed her wet long hair before walking out. While drying her hair, she walked to the door of the bedroom and saw the man sitting lazily against her bed, the quilt casually covering his important parts. His naked upper body and long slender legs were so dazzling. Lin Xiao. This position was really seductive. No, seductive zombies. Wu Chengyue was holding a book in his hand, and it was probably from her bedroom. After hearing Lin Xiao's movement, he raised his head and looked at her. There was a trace of strange heat in his eyes, but it was quickly covered up by his smiling eyes. Seeing Lin Xiao standing at the door drying her hair, Wu Chengyue turned his hand and put the book on the table beside the bed. He lifted the quilt and got out of bed, then walked toward Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao originally restrained herself from staring at a certain part of him, but from the corner of her eyes, she couldn't help but notice that when he walked, his third leg swung left and right. She slightly raised her head and stared at Wu Chengyue's face, but from the corner of her eyes, she was stimulated by what she saw. Damn, could he at least wear a pair of underwear? Was he so proud of walking his dick in front of her? What are you doing? Although her heart was already angry, her face was expressionless as she watched him walk in front of her. Lin Xiao asked coldly. Wu Chengyue just smiled, stood in front of her, and raised his hand to press the towel on her head. Then he raised his second hand, grabbed the towel on her head, and began to help her dry her hair. Dry your hair. What do you think I want to do? He looked at her meaningfully while he wiped her hair. Lin Xiao looked at him speechlessly. Wu Chengyue's movements were very gentle and very skilled. Lin Xiao's hair was very long, already reaching the length of her buttocks. If Wu Chengyue was a fire elemental, just a slight movement of his ability would be able to dry her hair. However, he wasn't, so he could only slowly dry it. Lin Xiao wasn't used to having her hair touched by others, so she subconsciously lowered her head when he pressed it down. The thing between his legs immediately rushed into her eyes. Lin Xiao tilted her head helplessly, then removed the towel from his hand, turned around, and walked to the side of the bed. Wu Chengyue only felt that his hand was empty, so he grabbed the slightly wet towel and watched her walk to the side of the bed. So he also walked over, sat next to her, and continued to help her dry her hair. Lin Xiao turned her head and glanced at him. Finally, she couldn't help but reach back and pull the thin summer quilt over, covering the area below his stomach. Chapter 970. Wu Chengyue's hand that was pulling her hair paused. Then he glanced at her. The corner of his mouth curled up more and more as he said, "Cover what? Didn't you want to use it later? Why don't you take a good look at it now?" Lin Xiao stared at him, the corner of her mouth twitching. This man was really thick-skinned. "No, it hurts my eyes," she said while gritting her teeth. Wu Chengyue was still smiling, and began to say to her insincerely, "How do you know if you don't look at it? Maybe you can touch it, and see if you're satisfied. Or do you want to go back on your word?" As he spoke, the movement of his hands didn't stop. Soon, the water on Lin Xiao's long hair was almost absorbed by the towel. Lin Xiao looked at his expression, and really wanted to give him a punch. She narrowed her eyes, then stretched out her hand, and directly pinched the other's lower body. Be gentle. What if you break it?" Wu Chengyue didn't expect her to suddenly make a move. He only reacted with a muffled grunt when a sharp pain came from a certain place. His whole body stiffened, and the movement of his hands also stopped. Lin Xiao's other hand suddenly pressed against the other's chest and pushed him onto the bed. Then she turned around and sat on the other's stomach. She put one hand on Wu Chengyue's strong chest and raised the other hand to touch a handful of semi-dry long hair. Then she lowered her face, pressed down on the stomach, and let the stomach gently rub against the other's skin. "If it's so easy for you to break it, then it's okay. I can borrow it from others. Anyway, I have a lot of men in this base." Lin Xiao narrowed her eyes, stared at the other's eyes from top to bottom, licked her light blue lips and said. A strong sense of oppression rose from her body as her gaze shrouded Wu Chengyue. She didn't have to have him. Wu Chengyue felt the oppression, and when he heard her words, a cold light flashed in his eyes. But he didn't move, just quietly lying down. Looking from the bottom up, the female zombie's face was even more vivid. Beautiful eyes, but there was a sharp light inside. Her delicate chin and dark lips carried a kind of fatal temptation. Her half-wet and messy pitch-black long hair hung down from both sides of her face and neck, the ends of her hair falling on his chest, bringing with it a cool dampness, but even more so a kind of ticklish feeling that swept across his heart. The oppressive aura indeed made Wu Qingyue feel a trace of pressure. But at this moment, Wu Qingyue was more concerned about the body that was sitting on his stomach. The feeling of their skin touching and sticking together made his heart burn with passion. Her skin was still very cold, but it felt smooth and exquisite. It made him want to touch it with his palms. He wanted to carefully feel that feeling with his hands. Because the bottom of this female zombie's nightgown was also empty. Damn it! Of course it won't break so easily. You can play however you want. The hunger and thirst in his heart almost filled his brain. But his mouth still smiled faintly at Lin Xiao. Although the other party's current posture was very tough, he didn't mind. After all, the other party's current body might be better this way. But some things still needed to be done in advance. Being teased by Wu Qingyue like this, no matter how good Lin Xiao's willpower was, she couldn't help but be speechless. How could he say this? Even if she wanted to play, she couldn't do it. Fuck. You're shameless, but I'm shameless. Because of Wu Qingyue's shameless words, Lin Xiao's momentum collapsed. The corner of Wu Qingyue's mouth changed, his hands suddenly wrapped around her waist, and then he exerted force with his back. The world spun, and when Lin Xiao reacted, she found herself lying on the bed. The two of them were in the same position as before, but now their roles were reversed. Of course, Wu Qingyue didn't dare to press on Lin Xiao's stomach, but he sat on Lin Xiao's legs. Lin Xiao's stomach was like a ball between the two of them. Wu Qingyue's hands touched Lin Xiao's stomach, feeling the vitality under her stomach. The light in his eyes softened a lot, and then he bent down and gently kissed her stomach. Turn off the lights for the unspeakable things below. There are benefits for joining the group. When Lin Xiao came back to reality from the floating sea of desire, she found herself lying on the bed. And behind her, someone was still tightly pressed against her, and a strong arm wrapped around her from behind. The feeling in her body slowly returned. She moved, and then her face darkened. Because a certain someone's rod was still in her body, and he hadn't pulled it out yet. Lin Xiao elbowed behind her, and said coldly with a hoarse voice, "Get out." However, she didn't know how tempting her lazy and hoarse voice was right now, especially when the original coldness in her voice was dissolved by this hoarseness. It was so tempting to Wu Qingyue's ears. And just now, he only had one chance to vent, and it didn't satisfy this man. So not 2 seconds after Lin Xiao spoke, she felt something in her body. Hard. Did it? Lin Xiao had the urge to crush that thing, and her face immediately darkened. Feeling a sudden killing intent from Lin Xiao, Wu Qingyue's body stiffened, and he could only regretfully slide out of her body. He sat up on the bed, and then got off the bed. Then he turned around, bent over, and bent down towards Lin Xiao. One of his hands went through her legs, and the other wrapped around her back. He hugged her tightly, and carried her up from the bed. "What are you doing?" Lin Xiao narrowed her eyes and asked subconsciously. At this time, her whole body was weak, and she didn't know why a dignified zombie like her would feel weak after doing this. When Wu Qingyue carried her, her heart only moved slightly, and she wanted to resist, but she couldn't control her body. "Go take a shower, don't you feel sticky?" Wu Qingyue's eyes narrowed into a line to show how good his mood was, and the smile on the corner of his mouth relaxed a lot. He wasn't just smiling out of habit like he usually did. After hearing what he said, Lin Xiao did feel a layer of stickiness on her body. She wouldn't sweat, and this sweat was smeared on her body when Wu Qingyue wrapped around her. And no matter what it was on her body, what made her feel the most uncomfortable was that a certain indescribable part was a mess. But, "No need, I'll do it myself. Put me down." Wu Qingyue had already walked to the bedroom door, and when he heard this he stopped. Looking at her, he slightly raised his eyebrows. "Are you sure? Your legs aren't weak?" Lin Xiao coldly stared at him and said, "It's not to the point where you can't walk. Let go." Wu Qingyue silently looked at her for 2 seconds, and finally compromised, and gently put her on the ground. Lin Xiao walked through the living room naked and bare-legged. The doors and windows of the living room were immediately covered by a black fog, and when Lin Xiao entered the bathroom, the black fog immediately drilled into the bathroom. Wu Qingyue looked, turned around, picked up the nightgown that Lin Xiao had just taken off, and put it on himself. Then he took Lin Xiao's slippers to the bathroom door. I put your slippers at the door. Chapter 971. To be honest, Lin Xiao's legs felt weak when she walked into the bathroom. She held the wall with one hand and her waist with the other. At the beginning, she faced Wu Qingyue and sat on him slowly. But in the end, the bastard complained that she was too slow. Therefore, he turned her body around and sat up to hug her from behind. Then he did this again and again. Anyway, in the end, Lin Xiao was in no mood to care about him, because she felt very tired. That strange and intense feeling deprived her of all strength and concentration. She used the water to wash away the sticky feeling on her body. Although she really wanted to soak in the bathtub. But she was afraid that it would be too comfortable, and she didn't want to get up. Instead of the bathtub, she wanted to lie on the bed. Hearing Wu Qingyue's voice outside the bathroom, she didn't say anything. After washing, she looked at the clothes in the bathroom and remembered that she didn't bring her nightgown. Seeing Wu Qingyue's nightgown hanging on the wall, Lin Xiao just took a bath towel and wrapped it around herself. She opened the door and saw her slippers at the door. After putting on the slippers and walking out, she saw Wu Qingyue wearing her nightgown, sitting lazily on the sofa. Because of her body, Lin Xiao's nightgown was also wide. But for Wu Qingyue, who was almost 1.9 meters tall, it was still a little short. His hands and feet were long. It felt neither fish nor fowl. Tut, please return my nightgown to me. Thank you. Don't make my nightgown too long. Looking at the satisfied and full expression on his face, Lin Xiao felt her teeth itch to bite someone. She snorted indifferently. Wu Qingyue smiled, indulging in her strange reaction. Without saying anything, he stood up, nodded, and walked towards the bathroom. When he changed into his nightgown and came out, he saw that Lin Xiao's bedroom door was closed. It was obvious that she didn't want to enter. Wu Qingyue sighed with a smile. He turned around and turned off the lights in the living room. Then he disappeared directly from her room. In the bedroom, Lin Xiao felt slightly relieved after Wu Qingyue left. But she still looked at everything in the room with a sad face. She couldn't help it. The smell was too strong. That's right, it was the smell. This place was now filled with Wu Qingyue's scent. It was like an invasion mode, messing up her own scent and forcing her to the edge. Wu Qingyue's scent invaded her entire bedroom. Moreover, there was also an oppressive masculine aura. That kind of dense aggressiveness filled Lin Xiao's entire body. She frowned and thought for a moment. In the end, she turned around to open the door and the window. This was so that the air could carry this aura away as soon as possible. The circulation of air had indeed lightened the smell in the room, but it was only a little. Lying on the bed, Lin Xiao felt helpless because the smell on the bed was stronger. Unable to bear it, Lin Xiao sat up and looked at the messy bed speechlessly. But she was so tired, her stomach was heavy, and her whole body was weak. Now she really did not have the strength to change a new bed sheet. He could only change the quilt. She grabbed the sheets on the bed, rolled them into a ball, and threw them on the sofa outside the bedroom. Then, she pulled out a new sheet from the cabinet. Only then did Lin Xiao resist the smell on the bed and lie down weakly. After hiding, the last bit of strength that she had just gathered immediately disappeared. Although her body was very tired, because Lin Xiao was a zombie, her mind was still very clear. It was just that her whole body was lazy and did not want to move. She did not even have the mood to absorb energy. But just now, a lot of Wu Qingyue's energy poured into her body. She did not expect that she could also absorb some. There was this kind of operation? Did she go to the wrong place again, and go to the cultivation world? Just now, when Wu Qingyue's children and grandchildren came out, it also brought out some of the energy in his body. Most of this energy was directly absorbed by her, and a small part was stuffed into little man's current home. Lin Xiao's eyes stared straight at the ceiling, and a bad feeling flashed in her heart. From what the two of them did just now, it was clear that the other party was very strong at the end, and she was somewhat unable to withstand it. But Lin Xiao remembered that from the beginning to the end, his movements were very gentle, as if he was carefully handling fragile porcelain. And when he kissed her stomach, there was a strange aura that spread from his body to her heart. It made her heart inexplicably itch, like a light spring breeze, lightly blowing her hair. It was very comfortable, and people could not help but want a little more. So towards the end, Wu Qingyue's kiss was still as overbearing as before, full of aggression and possessiveness. However, the resistance in her heart was gradually collapsing. Now that she thought about it, it was indeed somewhat bad. She turned her head to look outside the window, and there was not a bit of starlight in the dark night. The night after the end of the world was still raging with cold wind, and the atmosphere was gloomy. She closed her eyes to feel the changes in the space, and suddenly her body became light. When she reacted, she had already appeared on the sofa in the small building in the space. Lin Xiao was stunned, and then sat up. Looking at the clothes on her body, she thought that it was fortunate that she had found a set of pajamas to wear when she entered the bedroom. Feeling the sudden appearance of Lin Xiao's breath, all the zombies in the space stopped their movements, and uniformly looked in the direction of the small building. Farmer, who was squatting in the vegetable field, also raised his head at this time, with half a leaf of lettuce hanging from the corner of his mouth. Suddenly a small stone flew over, and hit his head with a bang. "Farmer, you secretly plucked leaves to eat again, didn't you? Wait and see how I'll deal with you later." Lu Tianyi stood on the other side of the green bean shelf, a dozen meters away from Farmer, and angrily glared in Farmer's direction as he spoke. But then he turned around, dusted his hands, and walked in the direction of the small building. Farmer, however, did not mind, and slipped the half-leaf hanging from the corner of his mouth into his mouth, and started chewing it. At the same time, his feet also walked in the direction of the small building, but he did not dare to walk towards the front door, and instead walked around to the side. Lu Tianyi smelled Lin Xiao's breath, and felt that it was a bit strange. As he walked he thought, why would there be another breath mixed in with Lin Xiao's breath? When he walked to the door of the small building, and entered the living room, his words were stuck in his throat before he could say anything. Fuck! Whose child is this? Lu Tianyi stood dumbfounded at the door, and looked at Lin Xiao's big belly. That was the only thing that came out of his mouth after he reacted. But when he thought about it, he immediately felt that something was wrong, and pointed at Lin Xiao with a trembling finger, and said unsteadily, "No, we haven't seen each other for only 2 months. Where did you go to put such a big ball?" A child back." Lin Xiao saw his reaction, and was already somewhat used to it. Faintly he said, "Oh, I put it on a long time ago. I just didn't tell you." Lu Tianyi. Chapter 972. Lu Tianyi stared at Lin Xiao blankly for a while, then suddenly said, "Could it be Leader Wu's?" Lin Xiao's expression froze, then stared at him expressionlessly. "You? What? Do? No. Dao. Of." Lu Tianyi saw that her expression was a little dangerous, and immediately became a little timid. At first, I was the one who exposed your identity to him." Lin Xiao narrowed her eyes. "What did you say? Exposed my identity?" Lu Tianyi wanted to raise his hand to wipe the sweat off his forehead, but he was a zombie now, so he couldn't sweat at all. However, his sister's aura was too strong, and it made him a little breathless. Why was it that ever since she became a zombie, she was like a different person? It had been so long, but he still hadn't gotten used to it. He was investigating your identity before. And then Qing Ming and I helped cover up your traces. He found out, so he directly asked me. I told him. Lin Xiao continued to look at him expressionlessly. So he knew my identity from you. But you haven't answered my question yet. Lu Tianyi's handsome face looked a little guilty, and at this time, he didn't have the calm feeling he used to have. His eyes looked left and right, and then he directly threw Wu Qingyue out. He said, "Wu Qingyue said it himself. Not only me, but Qing Ming also knows." Lin Xiao. Seeing that Lin Xiao's aura had subsided, Lu Tianyi was relieved. Then he continued to look at her belly curiously, and said, "But when he came to find me before, it has been more than 10 months since now. Your child, is about to be born? How come I couldn't see it at all before? Wait, you were pregnant before, and you still ran around. Suddenly thinking of this, Lu Tiany's face darkened. He stared at her with a disapproving face, and there was some worry and anger in his eyes. How could this woman run around when she was pregnant? Wasn't she afraid of something happening? Really daring. Is this something a pregnant zombie can do? She didn't even think about the child. But come to think of it, Wu Chunghua, that bastard son zombie, was one thing. But he actually managed to make his sister pregnant. That was a little too fucking incredible. Truly admirable. Lin Xiao sat on the sofa and watched the expressions on Lu Tiany's face change. She also sensed the disturbing thoughts in his heart. He was speechless. However, she still replied, I'm not an ordinary pregnant woman, and this child is not an ordinary child. I know the situation, and I've actually been very restrained. She was indeed very restrained. Ever since she knew that little man was in her stomach, she had already stopped making a fuss. Seeing that Lu Tiany was still unhappy, the two people's positions were immediately reversed. Even if this child isn't an ordinary child, and you aren't an ordinary person either. But what if? Have you ever thought about what you would do if something happened? Besides, you know that you're not an ordinary person, and this child isn't an ordinary child either. If something happens, no one can save you. The more she thought about it, the more worried she became. Lu Tiany glared at Lin Xiao with a hint of fire in his eyes. This was his nephew. Even if he gave birth to a monster, he was still his nephew. She was born from his sister's womb, and was also his family. Looking at his cheapskate brother, Lin Xiao felt that even his own brother Lin Hao wasn't so difficult to appease. Cough. Okay. I'll be careful in the future. And this child is about to be born. Isn't everything fine now? Lin Xiao smiled flatteringly, then said to him, Do you want to touch it? Originally, Lu Tiany was a little dissatisfied with her first sentence, but the last sentence immediately made him stunned. Then he immediately stared at the round belly. He looked up at Lin Xiao's face, then swallowed his saliva. What? You don't want to touch it? This is your niece, and it won't be long before it's born. It might be white and tender, with short legs and hands, or it might be a small zombie. Lin Xiao saw that his eyes were full of desire, but he was a little hesitant. She immediately smiled and seduced him. The image of a white and tender baby appeared in his mind, and Lu Tiany immediately couldn't stand it. He walked towards Lin Xiao, but his footsteps were a little hurried and a little nervous. He walked to Lin Xiao's side and didn't sit down. He just stood there and stared at her belly in a daze. When he got closer, he realized that this belly was really round. He imagined that there was a baby living in it. The feeling of life made people's hearts soften a lot. Lu Tiany was a little nervous, and he didn't understand why he was nervous. He wasn't the child's father, so why was he so nervous? It was just that this child came too suddenly. Even if he wasn't the child's father, he was the child's uncle, the first nephew in his life. In the past, he couldn't believe that Lu Tiany would give him a nephew, because Lu Tiany's life was too complicated. The most important thing was that this woman's heart was cold. She didn't plan to have a child herself, and she didn't want to give birth to another man's child. Because it was easy for a child's body to change shape, she didn't want to make her well-maintained body ugly. Although she depended on many men to survive, she never fell in love with any one of them. So she never thought of giving birth to a child for any man. His hand touched the bulging belly like a ball, and it was a little hard. After touching it for a moment, Lu Tiany suddenly retracted his hand and didn't dare to touch it anymore. He didn't know why, but this belly felt like it was going to explode. It made him feel an inexplicable sense of danger. Lin Xiao looked at his reaction with amusement, and felt that this kid was acting like a young boy. What's wrong? Are you afraid that she'll bite you with this expression? She said with a smile, and there was a hint of ridicule and speechlessness in her words. No. Lu Tiany was a little embarrassed, and after thinking about it, he reached out his hand to touch Lin Xiao's belly. This time he was much calmer. She's been sleeping recently, otherwise she could have clapped hands with you. Lin Xiao smiled as she looked down at her belly, and said with a gentle look in her eyes. At this time, another person entered the door. Mo Yin walked in with the child zombies in the white dress that never left his side. When he saw Lin Xiao's expression, he was stunned. Mo Yan's handsome and evil face was stunned. He was at a loss for a few seconds, and then revealed an expression of disbelief. Lin Xiao turned to look at him and greeted, "You're here, sit." After saying that, he looked at the two heads that popped out of the door. It was Pesticide and Xiao Xiao. But the two of them refused to enter the room, and just stuck their heads out to look at Lin Xiao. Mo Yan's eyes stared at her belly subtly, and then walked over, and sat on the single sofa next to her. The female zombie stood quietly behind him. Chapter 973. Lin Xiao squinted her eyes and looked at Mo Yan. The cracks on his zombie core had become a lot thinner. However, it was just thinner, it didn't disappear. His corpse core was still densely covered in cracks. The black lines on his face had also become thinner and less. The cracks on your zombie core have healed a lot. Congratulations. I believe that if this continues, your strength will recover. Lin Xiao looked at Mo Yan and said. However, she looked at Mo Yan with an unreadable expression. She wasn't sure if this zombie emperor would go crazy again after it recovered. Mo Yan just looked at her silently. Lin Xiao said, "Actually, I'm also looking forward to your recovery. That way, with your cooperation, my base will be much safer." Her words were a little probing. Although Mo Yan had accepted her conditions before. He was forced to do so. So he should have some resistance. Now Lin Xiao wanted him to stay at ease, because it was just like what she said. The zombie emperor's aura could suppress all the zombies here. She just needed to subdue him. Even if his strength couldn't recover to its peak, it didn't matter. The corner of Mo Yan's mouth curled up, revealing an evil smile. That cold aura from before suddenly became both good and evil. However, he still nodded, agreeing with what Lin Xiao said. Then, his black eyes stared at Lin Xiao's stomach curiously, as if he wanted to say something. Lin Xiao looked at his eyes, and immediately understood what he wanted to say. She thought about it and said, "Maybe my body's mutation is special, that's why this happened. If it happened to the one behind you, or the other female zombies, I don't think it's possible." She looked at the female zombie behind Mo Yan. It had been 2 months since they last met. And her appearance had become even more beautiful. The muscles on her face had become smooth and glossy, and the dark circles around her eyes had mostly disappeared. Instead, it was like smoky makeup, giving her pitch-black eyes a kind of cold beauty. Her lips were full and had a hint of purple. She was originally a beautiful zombie, but now, she had become even more beautiful. Furthermore, the cold aura that he gave off when he was beside Mo Yan, and didn't respond to anyone else, immediately gave her a cold and aloof temperament. He didn't know where Mo Yan had picked up this beautiful female zombie. Mo Yan didn't turn around, but his eyes slightly glanced behind him. What he really wanted to know was, who was so powerful that this zombie leader had won the bid. However, the other party had obviously avoided this question, so he didn't probe any further. But this female zombie's body could actually give birth. He didn't know what was inside. Zombies? He felt that it couldn't possibly be a human. Before Mo Yan could express his curiosity, Lu Tianyi on the other side asked directly, "Oh right, if your body can conceive, what will be born? Half human, half zombie? Or a human infected with the virus? Or a small zombie?" Lin Xiao turned to him and said, "I also want to know the answer to this question." Everyone else. So he still had to wait. But for some reason, he was looking forward to it. Lin Xiao looked at Mo Yan and said to him, "Since staying in my space is really helpful to your situation, then please rest in peace. You've already killed all your enemies, so you should let go of some things. When you come out, you have to think about a new life, a new beginning." That was what she thought, but she didn't expect that after she finished speaking. She saw a flash of killing intent in Mo Yan's eyes. Lin Xiao was dazed. Could it be that this zombie's enemies hadn't all been killed? It didn't matter. If he wanted to move again, he would have to increase his current strength first. She stood up and walked to the door, ready to see what Lu Tianyi had done to the farmland outside. After walking 2 steps, she suddenly thought of something and said to Mo Yen, "Oh right, you guys can soak in the water in my lake every day. It should be of great help to your situation." The water in the pond dug by the lake was drawn from the lake. They didn't need to go to the lake to get water, but they could also get water from the pond. Soaking in the lake every day would be much more efficient than the energy in the air. Actually, in the space, Lin Xiao only told Lu Tianyi to soak in the lake with his mother for 1 to 2 hours every day. As for the other zombies like Pesticide and Xiao Xiao, as well as the dozens of level 3 and 4 zombies, Lin Xiao arranged for them to soak once every 10 days to half a month. So when Lu Tianyi took care of them, it was much easier. If they were obedient, they could soak in the water and enjoy it. If they weren't obedient, they wouldn't get to soak. In order to soak in the energy, the dozens of zombies worked very hard in the fields and didn't feel bored at all. Lin Xiao then turned to Lu Tianyi and said, "Just tell them where to get water. Don't worry about those two." Lu Tianyi looked at Mo Yen, then turned to Lin Xiao and nodded. Actually, Lu Tianyi had been keeping his guard up against this zombie emperor ever since it was here. The other party's aura was too strong, and he couldn't help but be on guard. Seeing that Lin Xiao was about to come out, Pesticide and Xiao Xiao had already disappeared. After Lin Xiao came out, the large patch of grass in front of the building had become paddy fields and wheat fields. Only 30% of the area was the melon and vegetable fields. There were many varieties. Almost all of the seeds that Lin Xiao had gotten from Haiqing had been planted. The field of strawberries was also growing very well, and was still full of fruits. Large green strawberries with red spots were hidden in the leaves, but they couldn't be hidden. Right now, this field of strawberries was considered a specialty of the base, and could only be eaten in the base. Other than the lake and the forest, even if one subtracted the area occupied by the 3 buildings, there was still about a dozen mu of land left. On the other side of the lake, the fertile field was already the territory of the mutant sheep and mutant deer. Lin Xiao sized it up, and suddenly discovered something. She squinted her eyes, and in the next second, she had already disappeared from her original position, and appeared in the territory of the mutant sheep and mutant deer. Her appearance immediately scared the mutant sheep and deer away. Lin Xiao didn't chase after them, and just stood there, squinting her eyes as she sized up the animals. She then sniffed with her nose, as though to confirm something. When she squinted her eyes, the image she saw was different from when she opened her eyes. This was because when she squinted her eyes, she could see many colors and patterns of existence. At this time, Lin Xiao saw that the virus energy in these animals seemed to have decreased by a lot. The bigger ones still had the virus in their bodies. However, the smaller ones, the virus in their bodies was very weak. Furthermore, the smaller ones, the fewer the virus. These small ones were all recently born. However, the virus in their bodies was the least, almost none. Furthermore, they looked normal, without any signs of mutation. Chapter 974. Lin Xiao looked at these roe deer and sheep. This discovery made her somewhat happy. It seemed that after living here for so long, the virus in their bodies had been neutralized by the energy in her space. The big ones that she caught didn't change much, but in the next generation they gave birth to, the change was obvious. In addition to the virus, their bodies also contained the energy in her lake. The virus in the second generation of sheep had almost disappeared. This kind of mutant sheep could be killed and soaked in the lake for 2 days. Then it could be eaten by humans. If these second-generation sheep gave birth to a third generation, could it be directly eaten by humans? If her space had this function, then could she catch some mutant chickens, ducks, geese, and pigs to raise? Then the base would have clean meat to eat in the future. The base would have meat to eat, and living conditions would be better. Everyone would have enough to eat and drink, and they would have the strength to kill zombies. The army would also be able to quickly train. On the other hand, they could also exchange resources with other bases, and exchange for what the base was currently lacking. Lin Xiao didn't need to catch the mutant sheep and mutant deer here. She could clearly sense the virus in each animal's body. She immediately decided that after a while, she would immediately send out a notice to hunt a batch of mutant poultry and mutant livestock. Anyway, her space was very big now, and she could slowly raise them. This matter could be arranged for Lin Feng to do. The effect would be faster if she sent out the task in the mission hall. After confirming the changes in the animals in this space, Lin Xiao returned to the small building. Looking at Lu Tianyi and the other zombies, she said, "You guys have been here for 2 or 3 months. Today I will take you out for a walk. Leave a few to be on duty." Lu Tianyi's eyes immediately lit up. "I will arrange it." Staying here for dozens of days without knowing the situation outside. Although Lu Tianyi wasn't the kind of person who couldn't bear the loneliness, he was also very happy to be able to go out for a walk. Soon, Lu Tianyi picked out a few zombies. "First take these few out and let them train in the army." Lin Xiao nodded his head and saw that Lu Tianyi had already habitually taken a rope and tied the zombies and pesticide Xiao Xiao together. Then she grabbed Lu Tianyi's arm and closed her eyes. When she opened her eyes, everyone had already appeared in her bedroom. "All of you get out." Seeing so many people suddenly appear in her bedroom, Lin Xiao was still very unhappy. As soon as he appeared, he immediately chased the corpses out. The other zombies naturally obediently went to the living room. Only Lu Tianyi hesitantly moved his nose. He paused for a moment before turning his head to look at Lin Xiao with an unfathomable expression. "Looks like you've made great progress. Can I call him brother-in-law?" Lu Tianyi looked at her for a while and said with a smile, "Brother-in-law my ass. Go go go." Lin Xiao chased him away like he was chasing a mosquito. "Really, I've been in the space for so long." The smell in the room was still so strong. Lu Tianyi rolled his eyes and walked out, saying as he walked, "You still don't admit it? They already had a child, and they had done everything that needed to be done. Weren't they going to be together? When did you become so unreasonable? You've had so many men in the past, but I've never seen you despise them." Lin Xiao's eyes flashed and he said lightly, "I didn't have the ability to protect myself in the past." She didn't say, "I don't have the ability to protect myself." Instead, she directly said that she didn't have the ability to protect herself. In fact, he was referring to Lu Tianyi, not her. Looking at Lu Tianyi, the longer time passed. The more she felt that this kid cared about his sister, the more she couldn't let him know her true identity. Otherwise, this kid would definitely be shocked, and she didn't know what he would do. It was certain that he would be sad, because his real sister was already dead. But she and Lu Tianyi were so different. Did this kid really not know? At the very least, he should be suspicious, right? Lu Tianyi looked at her, with a meaningful look in his eyes. But soon he walked out and didn't say anything else. At this moment, Lin Xiao couldn't perceive his thoughts, which was a little surprising. Entering the living room, Lu Tianyi turned to her and said, "Then how are you going to call the child? Call him Mama and call him Dad. But you two aren't together. What if the child sees other people's Papa and Mama together? How are you going to answer the child's question? And it's not good for the child's growth environment. People will laugh." Many children of single-parent families. If the single parents don't give twice as much love to the child, then the child will have some shadows in his heart when he grows up. When his parents are not around, others look at him with mocking eyes and use sarcastic words to provoke him. Sometimes it may be unintentionally said by others, but it's also a kind of harm to the child's ears. Seeing him say this, Lin Xiao could only say, "Little man's heart won't be so fragile. She is a sensible child." A child who dared to cheat his parents would be sad, because of a few words from others? That's impossible. When Lu Tianyi heard this, he thought that she was still a baby. How sensible could she be? And little man, was she a girl? Okay, you take them back to where you live first. After driving everyone out of her room, Lin Xiao realized that this time there was no random location in and out of the space. She had entered her bedroom before, and now she came out of her bedroom again. It seemed that now all her skills were back in place. She could enter and exit the space, and she could also use invisibility. Looking at the pajamas on her body, Lin Xiao's expression was a little embarrassed. She was wearing this to talk to Mo Yin just now. It was really rude. Lin Xiao thought that since Lu Tianyi and the zombies left, she should be able to rest peacefully. However, before she turned around to enter the bedroom, the door outside the living room was knocked again. Lin Xiao raised her eyebrows. The smell coming from outside the door was Duan, and that Audio. Looking at the time, it was 3 in the morning. No way this guy wouldn't attack Duan at night again, right? Opening the door, she saw Duan with a black face, her arms crossed. Seeing Lin Xiao open the door, she didn't say anything, but just pointed at the side, asking her to look to the side. Lin Xiao turned her head. Sure enough, a certain young zombie, who liked to pounce on people, was standing at the side with his hands behind his back. And her position just happened to be able to see the situation behind him. The zombie's hands were locked by a stone lock again. "You went to your room in the middle of the night again?" Lin Xiao said. Funny. Duan pursed her lips, not wanting to speak. She was having a good sleep just now, but this guy suddenly pounced on her and licked her face without saying a word. How depressing was that? She didn't know how this guy sneaked in without her noticing. This was the second time. Was her vigilance that bad? In any case, she was an elite of the special forces. How could she let a zombie with a bit of an IQ sneak into the room twice without noticing? Why was this? Why? Duan's heart was depressed, and at the same time, she was also puzzled. Chapter 975. Of course, Lin Xiao could sense Duan's thoughts, and looked at the young zombie next to him. He couldn't help but ask curiously, "He's really attached to you. Did he lick your face again this time?" Although he already knew what Duan did from her thoughts, Lin Xiao still wanted to say it, because Duan's expression was very interesting. Sure enough, as soon as Lin Xiao finished speaking, Duan's face became darker, and she glared at Lin Xiao. She always felt that this guy was less and less aware of being her leader. Was it really good to always treat her like this? Although this guy used to be very mean, he had restrained himself a lot after the apocalypse. Plus, he became a leader and became a lot calmer. Why did she feel like she was back in the army? Duan glanced at Lin Xiao's belly and wondered if it was because she was pregnant. "This is the second time that I saw him appear in my room." Duan said and stared at the young zombie next to her. She suddenly stopped. "What did you do?" You can't beat him even if you want to fight him. But it's really strange. Did he lick your face when he went to your room? I didn't see him lick Xiao Liqing's face before." This time it was Lin Xiao who was somewhat puzzled. She looked at Audio inquiringly. This guy's goal had changed, and he was so persistent that even her words didn't work. Well, her words didn't seem to work on this guy. And from the situation before and after, Duan didn't suffer any harm? Apart from being a little troubled, there didn't seem to be anything to worry about. It was reasonable to say that although this young zombie was a bit clumsy, his strength was actually not low. At least he could silently approach her, and Wu Qingyue every time without being sensed by her or Wu Qingyue. This was already very unusual. So, with his current level of 6 zombie, if he really wanted to harm Duan, it would be impossible for Duan to stand here and talk to her after his 2 night attacks. Lin Xiao looked at the young zombie, and obviously knew that this guy didn't seem to really want to tear Duan apart and eat her. Besides, this guy didn't seem to have eaten people. Duan, who was rebuked by Lin Xiao, held her breath. He couldn't help but glare at the zombie youth beside him with killing intent in his eyes. As a result, the young zombie immediately cowered. He shrunk his shoulders and turned his back to Duan and leaned against the wall. He pressed his face against the wall and closed his eyes, not daring to look at Duan. Lin Xiao. Was there a need to be so cowardly? It was just a glance, but it was filled with killing intent. But you're a level 6 zombie, a level 1 king after all. What are you afraid of? Duan glared at Audio with killing intent before turning around and leaving. He then left the young zombie in front of Lin Xiao's door and let her deal with it. The killing intent in Duan's eyes was not weak at all. She had killed many people, be it before or after the apocalypse. The blood on her hands was the same as that of Lin Xiao and Yuan Tianxing. This was the blood of people who had committed the most heinous crimes. Not a single one of them was clean. Therefore, if there was killing intent in Duan's eyes, it was real. It could instantly make people feel a chill down their spines, and their hearts were so stifled that they couldn't breathe. Seeing Duan turn around and leave just like last time, Lin Xiao helplessly looked at Audio, who was glued to the wall. She really didn't understand what this zombie wanted to do. Well, okay. She could sense what this guy was thinking. It was actually very simple. He just wanted to lick that fragrant person. Not to let him eat, but not to let him lick. What's more, you said you don't want to give it. So what if I lick? You didn't do anything to me last time? Well, this was what Lin Xiao sensed in this guy's mind. It was very childish, wasn't it? Could she tell him that licking him was actually molesting him? Okay, she could tell him, but could he understand? It seemed like he couldn't. She said he was stupid. This guy seemed to have realized from the previous situation that she couldn't really do anything to him. She just called Audiobook over to watch him. In the end, only a day had passed and Audiobook was nowhere to be found. What do you want to do? Lin Xiao held the door frame with one hand and her waist with the other. She felt that picking this guy up was really finding trouble for herself. Audiobook was still sticking to the wall without moving. Lin Xiao rolled her eyes and said, "She's gone. Now you know that you're afraid of her. Why did you provoke her just now?" She really didn't understand this guy. He had the guts to provoke her. But now how could he be scared by a murderous look? She had never seen such a strange zombie. His thoughts were really hard to guess. Even if Lin Xiao could sense his thoughts now, she still couldn't understand. Hearing Lin Xiao say that she was gone, Audiobook realized. He stealthily turned his head to take a look and saw that the sweet-smelling human had really left. His expression suddenly became a little disappointed. Lin Xiao looked at him, thought for a moment, and sensed Audiobook's breath. Then she used her breath to lead him over. After a while, Audiobook appeared in front of Lin Xiao's door. Lin Xiao waved her hand and said, "Take him away." After saying that, she closed the door, turned around, and went straight into the bedroom. Don't ask why she didn't turn off the light, because the light in Lin Xiao's room had been off since just now. They were all zombies, so it didn't matter whether they turned on the light or not. Outside the door, Audiobook silently glanced at the young zombie next to him and slightly frowned. He felt a bit of a headache. Because this guy was too good at running, he accidentally disappeared in the blink of an eye. Another week passed like this, after the wall of the second base was built, and the work was finished. Elmar and Xiadong also took a group of well-trained elite zombies to guard the edge of the activity area of the underground creatures, leaving Elmar and Old Gua to watch that area all day long. In fact, Lin Xiao didn't intend to let Old Gua go, but the old man ran over and proposed to go. Lin Xiao didn't have any opinion about him being idle in the base during this period of time. Seeing the old man suddenly propose to go outside the base, he didn't have any opinion and let him go. But Lin Xiao always felt that he seemed to have a purpose, but he didn't intend to inquire what he wanted to do. He just let Elmar pay attention to the old man's movements. And not waiting for Wu Qingyue to ask for his benefits for the second time. One night after this week, Lin Xiao suddenly felt a pain in her abdomen. She was suddenly shocked, thinking that there was something wrong with little man. After Duan Wan and Shen Yuzhen hurriedly sent her to Lin Hao, Lin Hao checked and told her with a strange expression. Well, she was going to give birth. Lin Xiao. What? She was going to give birth? How could it be so fast? It came too suddenly, and Lin Xiao was a little flustered. Didn't they say there was still a period of time? Only a week had passed. Chapter 976. Lin Xiao was lying on the delivery bed in the delivery room. She suddenly reached out and grabbed Lin Hao, who was beside the bed. She stared at him with her eyes wide open. Are you sure? She's really going to give birth? But why do I feel that? It doesn't look like it. And isn't it too fast? You said before that there would be a period of time. Lin Hao was also a little nervous at this time. There was no other way. He wasn't in the obstetrics department. He had never delivered a baby before. And this pregnant woman was his sister. She was also a zombie. And at this time, he didn't dare to let someone else deliver her baby. He could only look up medical books and cases by himself. I don't know either. But the position of the fetus has moved down. Do you feel anything other than abdominal pain? Lin Hao pressed her belly with both hands and said while touching the position of the fetus. Lin Xiao felt the pain in her stomach come and go. It was very uncomfortable. She shook her head. No. Lin Hao stood next to her and touched her belly. He felt that her belly was hard and soft at times. He knew that it was a contraction. He said to Lin Xiao, "It might not be so soon. We still have to wait." Lin Xiao took a deep breath. There was a wave of pain coming from her belly. Moreover, the pain was multiplied, causing her heart to feel a dull pain. She lay on the bed with her eyes closed. She wasn't afraid of pain. She was more looking forward to it. Was little man finally coming out? Lin Xiao was also very curious about what the child would look like after it came out. Although from the point of the fetal heart not beating, it was more likely that it would be a small zombie. But what if there were other unexpected changes? At this moment, Lin Xiao was looking forward to it, and a little excited. In order to divert her attention, Lin Hao asked, "Do you think that Wu Gai will be more nervous than you?" Lin Xiao wanted to leave the second base and come to the first base's medical center. She definitely had to drag Wu Qingyue over. So Wu Qingyue was now holding little Lingling outside the delivery room. How would I know? Lin Xiao glared at him. If it wasn't for this guy's idea, why would that bastard Wu Qingyue stay in her room and eat her clean a week ago? He really got lucky this time. At this moment, there were many people guarding outside the door. Other than Wu Qingyue, who was carrying Wu Yueling, Xiao Liqing, Duan Wan, Shen Yuzhen Xiedong, Qiu Lili Lu Jun, Lu Tianyi Lin Feng, and the others were all gathered there waiting quietly. From time to time, he would glance at the door of the delivery room. Qiu Lili pulled her long hair and put her ear to the door to listen. After a while she said doubtfully, "Isn't it said that every time a woman gives birth, she yells as if the sky is falling? Why isn't there any movement inside?" Lu Jun was the only woman here who had given birth before. She smiled and said, "Leader is probably still in the stage of contractions. It's not time to give birth yet. When the child enters the pelvic cavity and the skull starts to squeeze out, it should start to scream." Qiu Lili looked at her and asked, "How painful is it?" Lu Jun thought for a moment and said, "It's so painful that you want to tear open your stomach and carry the child out." His entire consciousness could not be focused anywhere else, and could only be focused on his lower body. Towards the end, his willpower might dissipate, but he wouldn't be able to give up. Because if he gives up, the pain will not disappear immediately, and the child will suffocate to death. So he can only break down while desperately giving birth to the child. Speaking of this, Lu Jun suddenly saw that the faces of all the women present didn't look good. So she thought for a moment and said, "But not all are like this. Some people's lives are very easy, and some people's lives are very difficult. And it also depends on how long the birth canal is open." All the men's expressions were also very painful, and then their eyes revealed a kind of complicated expression. Lu Jun finally said, "Anyway, the pain of giving birth may be like being hit in the stomach by a hammer." Qiu Lili's face turned pale, and she said in horror, "Fortunately, I have become a zombie. No, leader is also a zombie. I will never give birth to other people's children in the future. I don't think it's worth this pain for a man." Saying that, she thought of Lu Jun's previous situation, and her expression changed slightly. Realizing that she had said something wrong, she quickly said, Sorry Junjun." Lu Jun just smiled and said carelessly, "It's okay. In fact, although it's very painful, it's not without benefits. Look at me, at least I got Tong Tong. When the child was born, I felt that it was worth it no matter how painful it was. Because it gave me a living child." Xiedong stood beside her and couldn't help but hold her hand. But he said nothing. Lu Jun just looked at him, but didn't pull her hand back. So the surrounding atmosphere immediately changed, and everyone was inexplicably shown a face of love, and was stuffed with a mouthful of dog food. After hearing her words, Wu Qingyue didn't feel very good. His expression was a little absent-minded, and his eyes were fixed on the door of the delivery room. At this time, Lin Xiao in the room suffered more than 2 hours of labor pain, and the time of labor pain began to shorten. And it was getting more and more painful, and it began to spread to her waist and back. Lin Xiao slightly frowned, but her expression didn't change much. Lin Hao had been paying close attention to her expression. Seeing her frown, he immediately asked, "How is it? Is the labor pain shortening?" Lin Xiao took a deep breath and nodded. Lin Hao immediately tested the opening of her uterus, and was immediately surprised to find that it had opened up to 2 fingers wide. It seemed a little too fast, but it was a good sign. It meant that it wouldn't take too long to open up to 10 fingers. Lin Xiao couldn't help but ask, "What stage is it now? How long will it take for me to give birth?" The problem of posture and the embarrassment of being seen by her brother had gradually disappeared. Lin Hao looked at her and said, "Based on your situation, it should be relatively fast. But it should take at least 4 or 5 hours to reach the critical point." Hearing that, Lin Xiao immediately looked a little worried. Seeing her like this, Lin Hao couldn't help but comfort her. "Compared to others, you're already very fast. And now that your uterus has opened up to 2 fingers, it shouldn't take long to open up to 10 fingers. Be prepared. It will be more and more painful later." Lin Xiao. At this moment, she suddenly felt her stomach drop. There was a muffled sound of something cracking, and Lin Xiao immediately felt a large amount of liquid flowing out of her lower body. At the same time, there was a squirming feeling in her abdomen, as if something was pressing against her pelvic cavity. It felt hard and tight. Then a voice came to her mind. Mama, remember to use more strength later. Very, very hard." Lin Xiao felt her heart skip a beat, and she immediately felt relieved. Then, Lin Hao's expression didn't look good. He looked at Lin Xiao's stomach in confusion. Chapter 977. Lin Hao looked at the violent movement under Lin Xiao's belly. He was stunned for a while, and suddenly realized something. He turned his head and saw that Lin Xiao's lower body's birth canal was quickly opening, and a transparent liquid gushed out of the hole. "Sister, your child is more anxious than you." He suddenly felt helpless. What should he do now? Well, the position of the fetus was good, and it didn't need to be corrected. Now he could only rely on the mother to work hard. Right, give her something to bite in her mouth. Lin Xiao only felt a tearing pain coming from her lower body, and felt that her pelvis was about to be split open. It was painful, very painful. The pain made her legs weak, and her consciousness floated a little. But she endured it, biting the towel in her mouth. Little man's voice was transmitted to her mind. "Mommy, come on." "Oh, it hurts." Lin Xiao was a little speechless. Who was in pain, you or me? Lin Hao also said to her. Use more strength. Use more strength. Although you're not breathing, you still have to make the action of inhaling. This can relieve the pain in your body and increase your endurance. Lin Xiao could only follow his words. Take a deep breath through her nose, and then exhale. When you exhale, concentrate your strength on your lower body and force the child out. Lin Hao was standing between Lin Xiao's legs at this time. He looked up and spoke to her while staring at her birth canal. Lin Xiao bit the towel in her mouth, and her hands tightly grasped the handles on both sides of the birth canal. She used so much strength that the handles were deformed. The pain in her lower body and lower abdomen made her feel like she was better off dead. She felt a hard object in her uterus was drilling out of her lower body. At this time, Lin Hao suddenly said to her, I'm going to start cutting. However, Lin Xiao had no strength to respond to him now. She just bit the towel, and the blue veins on her face bulged. Her whole consciousness was about to leave this body, but there was still only one thought in her mind, and that was to force little man's hard head out. After Lin Hao finished speaking, Lin Xiao quickly felt a slight stab of pain from the hole in his lower body. However, this stab of pain was too insignificant compared to the tearing pain inside. Lin Hao made a cut on the side of her birth canal to make the exit a little bigger, because something hard and dark had squeezed out of the mouth. Thick, dark red blood flowed out of the small incision and quickly dyed the little black head. Lin Hao was wearing gloves, so he was not afraid of touching Lin Xiao's blood. Faster, 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 harder. It was about to come out. Harder. Use more force. After seeing the fetal head, Lin Hao immediately shouted excitedly to Lin Xiao. This was the most difficult hurdle. Once the fetal head came out, it would be fine. In that case, the original would suffice. Ugh. Ugh. Lin Xiao closed his eyes tightly and finally let out a miserable cry from his throat. But when she cried out, she gathered all her strength in her lower body. With a muffled sound, Lin Xiao suddenly felt his body loosen up, as if his entire body was about to fall apart. But soon she felt something stuck in her lower body. Lin Hao immediately held the baby's head and carefully pulled it out with both hands. As he squeezed the mucus out of the child's mouth and nose, he said, "Don't let up." His body hadn't come out yet. "I'll count to 3, do it again." As he spoke, he began to count. 1, 2, 3. At the same time, his hands gently pulled out. Lin Xiao exerted more force as he chanted. Finally, he squeezed out the thing that was stuck in his lower body. The two of them heaved a sigh of relief. Lin Hao was also sweating profusely. It was all over his forehead, which was not covered by his sanitary cap and mask. In his hands was a little green and wrinkled person. The wet fetal hair on his head was stuck to his scalp. It was ugly no matter how you looked at it. But Lin Hao was still happy. He cut the umbilical cord neatly, and then carried the baby to the side on a towel with both hands to let him lie down. While wiping the baby with a sterilized towel, he said, "Great, a white and fat boy." Lin Xiao laid down powerlessly. She had already spat out the towel in her mouth. After hearing Lin Hao's words, her eyes were still blank. After a few seconds, her expression suddenly froze and she turned her head abruptly. "What did you say? A boy?" His voice was hoarse. It was unknown if it was because he used too much strength. "And yes, a boy. He looks very healthy, but why isn't he crying?" After wiping the baby, Lin Hao patted the baby's little butt with one hand. However, the child didn't have any reaction. Lin Hao stared at the child thoughtfully. He saw that the little guy's hands were already open, and his legs were kicking. He couldn't open his eyes for a while, but from the kicking short legs, he was quite energetic. He didn't notice the strange tone in Lin Xiao's words. At this time, Lin Xiao first looked at him blankly, and then looked at the baby on the table. She suddenly laughed. "Puffed, ha 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 ha, little man, did you hear that? Your uncle said you were a boy. So you are a boy." At the end of her words, she had a sense of understanding. Lin Hao turned his head and looked at her blankly. He couldn't understand what she said. What was going on? These words were obviously said to the baby. He knew that the child was only born a few minutes ago. He definitely couldn't understand his mother's words. But Lin Hao felt that Lin Xiao's words seemed to be understood by the child. However, "You gave him the nickname Little Man? Why did you give him such a girl's nickname?" Lin Hao wrapped the child in a towel with a puzzled expression. Then he carried the child in front of Lin Xiao and stuffed him into her arms. He opened his mouth and asked. At this time, Lin Xiao looked as if she had gone through a serious illness. Her face was pale, but her expression was relaxed and she said with a smile, "Oh, he named himself." Lin Hao walked under her and was about to let her discharge the placenta again. After hearing this, he was stunned. He is still a baby. How can he name himself? He had an expression that said, "Don't bully me because I don't read much." Lin Xiao curled her lips and said, "Ask him if you don't believe me." Thinking that the child would have a depressed expression with the name Little Man in the future, Lin Xiao couldn't stop laughing in her heart. Lin Hao pursed his lips and couldn't be bothered to talk to her. After letting her discharge the placenta, he checked the birth canal. He wanted to stitch up the wound, but when he looked at it, "Hey, your body has such a strong self-healing ability," Lin Hao said in surprise. Because in order to make it easier for the child's head to come out, the wound he made was now half healed. He didn't need to stitch it up. Chapter 978. When Lin Xiao heard his words, she nodded and said, "This body's self-healing ability has always been very strong. Okay, don't worry about me. Let me rest for a while, and then I can go." As she spoke, she hugged Little Man, looked at his wrinkled little face and touched her chest. Then she said with a strange expression, "Lin Hao, look, this child's heart is beating." Lin Hao, who was packing up, was stunned. He quickly put down the things in his hands and walked over. He picked up the stethoscope from the side and put it on Little Man's chest. Then his expression became a bit confused. "How can it be? Why couldn't I feel it when he was in your stomach before?" Lin Xiao smelled Little Man's scent. Apart from having an intimate connection with him, the scent was still Little Man's, but the smell had changed. "He's alive." Lin Xiao looked at Little Man and said with a complicated expression, She never thought that her zombie body could give birth to a living human. She thought that if little man wasn't a zombie, he would at least look like a half zombie, half human. Lin Hao didn't say anything. He measured little man's heart rate, then looked at little man's mouth and nails. Look at these nails. His body temperature is also very low. His heart rate is also a bit slower than a normal baby. After checking, Lin Hao said with a dignified expression. So even though he was a human, his physical signs weren't up to standard. Even though he was a zombie, he was still alive and had a heartbeat. Lin Xiao followed his words and looked at little man's little hand. She immediately saw a faint virus on his purple nails. There were all 10 fingernails. So if his claws scratched someone else, that person would definitely be infected with the zombie virus. She couldn't feel the body temperature that Lin Hao mentioned, because she herself was cold. And little man was still wrapped in a layer of towel. Lin Xiao thought about it. It was okay to raise him as a zombie. This little guy was so smart. It wasn't a problem for her. She suddenly pinched his wrinkled little face and said, "If you don't say anything, do you want to swallow the phlegm in your mouth?" Lin Hao looked at her strangely. Then in the next moment, he saw the baby in her arms twist its face and spit at the empty space beside it. Ba Lin Hao. Regardless of the stunned Lin Hao, Lin Xiao had enough rest. He immediately got up. Although his legs were still weak, walking was no longer a problem. She put on her slippers and asked Man as she walked out, "Son, I don't have milk. Do you want some milk? I'll give you the goat milk in the space, okay?" Little Man's eyes were closed. There was a dark blue circle around her eyelids, and her little mouth was also blue and white. At this time, when she heard Lin Xiao's words, she couldn't help but purse her lips, and then open her little mouth. "Mama, let's discuss something, okay?" Little man's voice was very tender and soft, a standard baby's voice. But his tone was a little mature. In the past, he also thought that he should be a girl. Even if he was formed in Mama's stomach, he didn't realize his gender. Now that he knew that she had become a boy, Little Man felt that this nickname of hers could give him a psychological trauma of having 2 bedrooms and 1 living room. Inexplicably, I feel so girly, don't I? Lin Xiao smiled and walked to the door of the delivery room. As she opened the door, she smiled and said, "What's the matter?" As she spoke, she opened the door, but she didn't look at the people outside the door who were frozen in an instant. Instead, she looked down at Little Man. "I want to change my name." In Little Man's tender voice, there was an inexplicable feeling of pain in the balls. There was a gasp outside the door. Lin Xiao looked up. Fuck. She almost forgot that there were people waiting outside the door. The people outside the door stared at the Little Man in her arms, as if they had seen a ghost. Fuck, did they hear it wrong just now? That baby's voice couldn't have come from this child's mouth, right? And at this time, Lin Hao's expression was similar to that of the people outside the door. But before the people could react, he had already taken a step forward and spoke first. Fuck. You gave birth to a demon baby. Demon child? Not a demon baby? There must be a demon when things were abnormal, whose child could speak as soon as he was born. What's more, this child seemed to have squeezed out by himself when he was just born. Not to mention that this little fellow didn't even cry. Not to mention that, what the hell was spitting out saliva? As soon as he spoke, the people came back to their senses. Although they knew that Lin Hao's words were not derogatory, no one liked their child to be called a demon. Wu Qingyue's face immediately darkened. Shut up. Do you know how to speak? What demon baby? Can't you see that this is clearly a corpse baby? Lin Xiao glared at Lin Hao unhappily, but the meaning of what she said was actually no different from what Lin Hao said. Mama, are you trying to scare everyone silly by saying this? I'm clearly a human being. The soft and sweet voice of a baby sounded, even though Little Man couldn't open her eyes yet. Although Little Man couldn't open her eyes, he could distinguish the breath of everyone present just by smelling it. Everyone. No, what she said won't scare us silly. You're going to scare them silly if you speak so boldly, okay? Have you forgotten that you're still a newborn baby? Lin Hao's ability to accept was also quite strong. At this time, he was already not as surprised as before. Anyway, even his sister could change bodies and come back to life. What could be more mysterious than this? At this time, Lin Xiao looked at Little Man and said, "Fortunately, you didn't give birth to your original form. Otherwise, how ugly would you be with a vine on your head?" Little Man. Except for Wu Qingyue and Little Man, no one else knew what Little Man's original form looked like. However, after hearing what she said, everyone became curious. But soon, they all came over and stared at Little Man, as if she was an animal in the zoo. In the end, the baby wrapped in the towel was very normal. On a small face there were 2 eyes, a nose, and a small mouth. If one looked closely, they could see that it would be very beautiful and cute when it grew up. Wu Yueling, who was in Wu Qingyue's arms, was the most excited. She held Wu Qingyue and stretched her neck to look. She found that Little Man was very small now. Is this a sister? Because they were very close, Lin Xiao immediately sensed Wu Yueling's thoughts. She looked up and smiled at her. No, it's a brother. Lingling, take good care of your brother in the future. A boy. Everyone was stunned, but their expressions didn't change much. It could even be said that they were disappointed. Qiu Lily was the most obvious. Ah, it's a boy, Lu Jun also said regretfully. I was going to say that if it's a girl, we should book it for our Tong first. Lin Xiao and Wu Qingyue. Hey, they haven't even given birth, and they're already staring at them. Did she agree? So small. And ugly. Although Qiu Lily looked disgusted, her eyes still sparkled as she looked at Little Man's face. Please don't teach her to call me that again, okay? I treat Lingling well, not because I want to be her mother. Even if her thoughts were different from before, she still didn't want their feelings to intersect too much. And she didn't want to accept him, or any other man. She really didn't want to experience the feeling of breaking up again. Although from Wu Qingyue's tone, his possessiveness was very strong. But the relationship between a man and a woman was the most unpredictable. Who knew when his feelings for her would change again? Lin Xiao knew that Wu Qingyue was very strong, so she believed that he wouldn't die so easily. But the end of the previous 2 relationships made her afraid of going through that kind of pain again. Wu Qingyue saw that her expression was a little gloomy and cold, so he could only sigh. Okay. I understand, I'll call her Auntie Lu. Is that okay? Only then did Lin Xiao turn around and continue to walk forward. As she walked, she said without looking back, I think I'll like it better if you call me sister. Okay, it's getting late. Lingling needs a good rest. Leader Wu, you should take Lingling back first. Since Little Man had already been born, then the situation where she was bound to Wu Qingyue should be resolved. So there was no need for him to continue to follow her for her convenience. Besides, she had been away from High City for almost a month, so it was time for her to go back. Wu Qingyue followed behind her with Wu Yueling in his arms. Looking at her back, he tightly pursed his lips. Although he really wanted to reject her request, he didn't want to argue with her. He felt that she had the feeling of throwing him away after using him. It was very uncomfortable. I understand. Wu Qingyue was expressionless for more than 10 seconds before he stopped in his tracks. He turned around and left. Duan Wan and Shen Yuzhen looked back at Wu Qingyue's back and inexplicably felt that his back view was a little bleak. Then they turned back to look at their leader and sighed in their hearts. Between the 2 of them, only Duan Wan knew why Lin Xiao had been inexplicably vigilant. But Shen Yuzhen didn't understand why the atmosphere between the 2 of them suddenly became cold again. Wasn't it pretty good not long ago? She thought that Wu Qingyue had hope. Arriving at Lin Hao's consultation room, Lin Hao examined her body. He found that there was nothing wrong with the female zombie's stomach, except that it looked a little loose. How much energy do you feel from your zombie core has recovered? He asked after thinking for a while. Lin Xiao said, originally, it had recovered by 15% in these 2 months. But during the labor process just now, this 15% was used up. I can't feel a trace of energy now. Lin Hao asked again. What about other places? Is there anything strange? Or should I say, has everything returned to normal? Lin Hao had secretly recorded all the various situations that happened during her pregnancy. He knew that after the child was born, these situations would definitely change. Generally, there were two aspects. One was that it would slowly return to normal, and the other was that it would disappear and never be able to return. Lin Xiao shook his head and said, "How can it be so fast? Maybe it still needs a little more time. But the control of space has returned to normal, and the area of my space has increased again." After squinting his eyes to sense the space, Lin Xiao immediately saw that the white fog wall had retreated a very long distance at the original edge. Chapter 980. Apart from energy exhaustion, there is another situation that needs to be confirmed. Lin Xiao said. "What situation?" Lin Hao asked. Lin Xiao glanced at him and said, "It's the invisible binding between him and me." She had previously told Lin Hao the reason why she suddenly disappeared for the past 2 months. Lin Hao was stunned and said in surprise, "Why, he hasn't left yet?" Lin Xiao shook her head and said, "He's in the baby's room." Lin Hao nodded and said, "Oh." The baby's room was only a few dozen meters away from here, and it didn't exceed 200 meters. Lin Xiao couldn't sense whether the binding had been broken or not. "What are you going to feed the baby next? It's hard to get fresh milk now. Or do you want to find a pregnant woman to be my nephew's wet nurse?" Lin Hao also knew that Lin Xiao didn't have any milk, so it was impossible for the little guy's first mouthful of milk. The milk from before the apocalypse had already expired, and now the cows and sheep had all mutated. Who would dare to give the milk of a mutated cow or sheep to their own children? Even if there were some cows or sheep that hadn't mutated in the major bases, the number was very small. There wasn't much milk that could be produced, and they were all very precious. Lin Xiao stood up and walked towards the door saying, "No need to find a wet nurse. I have a way to get milk for little man. Not to mention that there were a few second-generation sheep in her space that had already given birth and were full of milk. Although the second-generation mutant sheep in her space still carried a trace of virus, the milk was mixed with her space lake water. It would be able to dissolve the virus. Moreover, since little man was born by her, although the body was human, it was still unknown whether his digestive system was like that of a human. There was a trace of virus in his mouth, nails, and even in his blood. Maybe he himself was a zombie virus immune body. Therefore, she didn't have to worry about little man's food. You still call him little man. Have you considered the size of his psychological shadow? He is very mature now. Be careful that he doesn't care about you anymore." Hearing Lin Xiao call her nephew little man, Lin Xiao's eyes lit up. Lin Hao thought of the child's childish voice at the door of the delivery room. He could even speak now, and his words were clear and coherent, with perfect articulation and pronunciation. He really was a demon baby. It felt as if there was a mature soul in that small body of his. Could it be that the children of zombies will all be like this? Lin Hao didn't know why, but he suddenly thought of zombies giving birth in the future. Actually, other than Lin Xiao, he didn't know if other zombies could give birth. Lin Hao said as he walked out with a document that recorded the baby. "If he wants to change, let him change it himself. But I really didn't expect him to be a boy. And I think he knows better than us about the problem of eating." Lin Xiao was still wearing the maternity clothes from the hospital. She was wearing the thin suit jacket that she usually wore. The two of them walked towards the nursery. "No wonder you've never been worried about the child's growth environment. Now it seems that the child's mind is already so mature. I don't think he would care about why mom and dad aren't together anymore." Lin Hao suddenly thought of this question that they had talked about before. Xiao Lin. No, she cared about it very much. Looking at how this little fellow tricked her previously, it was obvious that he also wanted to matchmake her and Wu Qinghua together. Although she didn't know how this guy's IQ grew so fast, he knew what he should and shouldn't know. When they arrived at the nursery, they saw Wu Qinghua, Wu Yueling, and Qiu Lily lying on the side of the small baby bed staring at it. Lu Tianyi and Xiao Liqing stood by the bed, and also stretched their necks to look. After Wu Qinghua saw her and Lin Hao appear, the smile on his face faded. He looked at Lin Hao and asked, "I want to know about the child's physical examination." This was a special nursery, and there was only one baby in the whole room. Little man Lin Hao said what he knew before. His current situation is a bit special. From the physical characteristics, he is indeed a human. but his body temperature is low, and his heart rate is twice as slow as a normal baby. The gums in his mouth and fingernails all contain the virus, and the virus also exists in his blood. I'm not sure if he will completely turn into a zombie when he grows up, or if the virus will weaken and turn into a human. This can't be determined right now. Other than the fact that he can speak since he was born, there's nothing else. At this time, Little Man was lying on the small bed and sleeping, but everyone present could feel that the child's breathing was very light and weak. 2 round and tender little hands were exposed, and might have been pulled out by some of the people present. But now they were gently hooked by Wu Yueling's little finger. Wu Qingyue's eyes dimmed, and asked, "Then can he live like a normal human child in the future? Or will he be like a zombie?" Lin Hao jotted down things on the file while shaking his head and replied, "I'm not sure about this either. But I think it's more inclined to be like a normal baby. After all, his appearance and body condition are mostly in line with human characteristics." Hearing this, Wu Qingyue let out a sigh of relief. At this time, Lin Hao began to chase them away and said, "Okay, the baby needs quiet. And your breath will make him unable to sleep well. You all go out, do what you need to do." So everyone was immediately chased out. And before leaving, Lu Tianyi also asked one thing. "Is the milk powder ready? Speaking of which, does the leader have milk to feed?" Yes. You don't have to worry about this. Your leader will take care of it." Lin Hao waved his hand, while observing Little Man without raising his head. Lin Xiao was also chased out, and she had a feeling of being abandoned. Clearly, when she was pregnant before, Lin Hao was often nervous, as if something was wrong. Now that she had given birth, he didn't care about her anymore. Outside the door, she saw Wu Qingyue still standing on the side with Wu Yueling in his arms. Wu Yueling's eyes were also somewhat unable to hold on at this time. She was half blinking, and her eyelids kept dropping. Lin Xiao glanced at the father and daughter and didn't speak. She just turned to Qiu Lily and said, "Tonight, you stay here and look after Little Man. I'll go back first and come back tomorrow." She still had some work to do, and when she was halfway through, she suddenly had a stomachache, so she ran out to give birth. Now looking at the sky, it was almost dawn. Just in time to go back and finish today's work, and also deal with the next day's work in advance. Oh, got it. Qiu Lily had always been idle anyway. If there was nothing important, she would just wander around the base. Now that she was called to look after the child, no one was more suitable than her. Chapter 981. After Lin Xiao left the hospital, he looked back at the hospital from the side door. Then she turned around and got into the car. Watching the car leave the hospital, she calculated the distance between her and Wu Qingyue in her heart. Wu Qingyue should be at the main entrance, but he didn't leave. He seemed to be waiting for something in the car. Xiao Liqing sat in the driver's seat with his left hand on the steering wheel. His head and right shoulder were slightly tilted back as he looked at Wu Qingyue behind him. He didn't know why Wu Qingyue had asked him to wait, but as a subordinate, he couldn't ask everything. He could only quietly wait for Wu Qingyue's reaction. After a while, Wu Qingyue said, "Let's go back and pack up. When the sun rises, we might have to change places." Xiao Liqing immediately started the car. As he drove away, he asked, "Change places to live? Why?" The corners of Wu Qingyue's mouth curled into a faint smile, but the look in his eyes was somewhat gloomy. "Because we no longer have a reason to stay there." The second base of Universal Life Base was a secret, and the two of them were outsiders. The reason why he let them live there was because the female zombie had to live there. Now that the distance restriction between the two of them had disappeared, it was naturally inconvenient for the other party to let him continue staying there. What's more, there were zombies over there. To them, the few of them were just like a few fragrant roasted pigs, tempting them all day long. Lin Xiao sat in the car and sensed the distance between him and Wu Qingyue. When he was 200 meters away from Wu Qingyue, he was no longer affected. He immediately heaved a sigh of relief, feeling like he was finally free. After all, she had been bound to Wu Qingyue's side for the past 2 months, and he had even taken the initiative, while she had only been passive. This feeling was as depressing as it could get. Even if Wuxia agreed to cooperate with her, he was still under the control of others. I don't like it at all. Lin Xiao had never liked the feeling of being restrained, and she hated those who wanted to threaten her even more. Usually, those who dared to do so would not have a good ending. But this time it was related to little man, so Lin Xiao endured it patiently. However, under the relaxed freedom, Lin Xiao faintly felt an inexplicable sense of loss. She knew why, but she didn't want to find out. After all, she had been with that man for the past 2 months. She had gradually gotten used to his aura and his presence. Even if they hadn't had sex last time, Lin Xiao would still have a bad reaction in his heart. Fortunately, she had always been rational, and now she intended to close the door to love. So even if she was a little disappointed, she still pretended not to notice it. Instead of returning to the office, he went back to his room to change his clothes. He returned to his usual army green uniform, loose pants and shirt, and a military jacket. It had been a long time since he wore a military cap and military boots. Lin Xiao heaved a sigh of relief when he was finally able to tuck his shirt into his waistband. She always wore casual clothes when she sat in the office, which made her feel that she was not serious. Not to mention, it was inconvenient to wear casual clothes when going on a mission. She touched her flat belly. Lin Xiao did not have the belly that normal pregnant women would have during pregnancy. Her body was already a zombie. Other than absorbing energy to nourish the body's necrotic flesh, it would not let her grow any extra fat. But her lower abdomen was at least stretched by little man. The elasticity of her belly could not be retracted, which made her belly look really soft. But the shape of her waist did not change. Once she wore the clothes, she had a big chest, a thin waist and long legs. Lin Xiao combed her long hair behind her back and put on her hat to go to the office. Seeing Lin Xiao change back to the familiar clothes, Duanwan and Xin Yuzhen had a subtle feeling. The most obvious feeling was that this woman, this female zombie's sharp aura had returned. No wonder she was so gentle before. She was pregnant. Why didn't they notice it? Send someone to rearrange Leader Wu's residence. Ask him to move to the number 1 base. It is not convenient for him to move there. Lin Xiao walked out of the dormitory and suddenly ordered Duanwan. Yes. Duanwan nodded. Before going to the office, Lin Xiao entered the space again. She directly appeared on the grassland with sheep and roe deer on the other side of the lake, and it happened to be next to a milk mutant sheep. The mutant sheep was startled by her sudden appearance. It jumped up and wanted to run, but Lin Xiao quickly grabbed it. Then he brought it into the forest and used the vines left by Little Vine to tie the sheep to a tree. Then she went to the small building and found a bowl and a cup of water, and appeared next to the milk mutant. When Lin Xiao came out of the space again, she was holding a covered bowl of sheep's milk, and said to Xin Yuzhen, "First send this to the hospital, give it to Dr. Lin. Just say it is for little man." Little man? Xin Yuzhen was surprised. Hearing Lin Xiao's words, she could guess who this bowl of milk was for. But when she heard the name Little Man, she was a little uncertain. That seemed to be a boy. Why did he have such a girly nickname? Lin Xiao smiled and said, It's a habit, I can't change it. Go quickly." Yes. Xin Yuzhen took the sheep's milk and left. Lin Xiao then went to the office building. After arriving at the office, Lin Xiao took off her hat and put it aside to start working. On the other side, Wu Qinghua was also instructing Xiao Liqing. "Ask Yushan to go back to our base and bring some milk powder, as well as some baby clothes. Send them here as soon as possible." Xiao Liqing nodded. Yes. So when little man woke up, he saw Lin Xiao sitting next to his little bed with a bowl of hot milk. "Yo, demon treasure." "Pooey." Little man woke up. Come. "Hungry? Your mama just brought you a bowl of sheep's milk. She said it is for you to drink. See if you like it." Lin Xiao saw little man's nose move, and the eyes under his eyelids also move. He knew he was awake. But now he really couldn't treat this little guy as a normal baby. After all, when this little guy was born, the movement was simply indescribable. As Lin Xiao spoke, he carefully put the little bowl next to little man's face. Little man's little mouth moved, and then he was silent for a while. Then he said in a negotiating tone, "Second uncle, Can you not call me little man? You can even call me baby. Lin Xiao heard the helplessness and pain in his soft voice, and couldn't help but laugh. Ah, sure, then call me baby. But how do you know I am your uncle? Did your mother tell you? Little man nodded and said, Of course, Mama told me. I am hungry, give me the milk. I can smell the food, it is very fragrant. I can drink it. Chapter 982. When Lin Hao heard this, he put the bowl of milk aside. Then he picked him up from the small bed and put him on his lap, supporting his back with his left arm. Then he picked up a small spoon with his right hand and began to feed him. While feeding, he said, Can you distinguish the smell of food? Can you smell what you can eat? Or can you smell what others can eat? If he could only smell what he could eat, that would be good. If he could even smell what others could eat or couldn't eat, that would be a bit like his mother's skill. Was it hereditary? Little man said, I can only distinguish if I can eat or not. I think this bowl of milk is drinkable. He couldn't distinguish the ingredients in the bowl of milk, but the smell of the milk told him that it was edible. Lin Hao said, It feels like a small animal, distinguishing by smell? Come on, open your mouth. Your first mouthful of milk was not fed by your mother, but by me, your uncle. But baby, don't tell others that I am your uncle. Now his sister was still using someone else's identity, and he was afraid that the child shouting would cause others to be suspicious. Little man opened his mouth and drank a mouthful of milk. There was a faint smell of milk in the milk. However, after swallowing it, one would feel a little sweet and refreshing, and it wasn't unpleasant to drink. After drinking a mouthful, he said to Lin Hao, Don't worry, I'm just young, I'm not stupid. I know what my mother's situation is now. His tone was filled with disdain towards this second uncle of his. Lin Hao. It was so tiring to talk to a baby with a small heart, and there was an inexplicable sense of crisis that his IQ was about to be crushed. At this time, little man suddenly said, Oh, little uncle is here. Lin Hao was stunned. Who? Then he heard footsteps coming from outside the baby's room, and the transparent window on the door showed Lu Tiany's face. Oh, little man knows this person. Well, he was indeed an uncle. Lu Tiany glanced into the baby's room and saw that Lin Hao was already holding the baby and feeding him. He opened the door and walked in. He's awake. Where did the milk come from? Lin Hao said, Oh, the leader sent someone to deliver it. Lu Tiany walked to little man's side and looked at his still closed eyes. He couldn't help but ask, When can this child open his eyes? Lin Hao looked at the degree of adhesion of little man's eyelids and saw that the inner corner of her eyes had opened a little. So he said, It should be soon. I think half of it will be open today, and all of it will be open tomorrow. It was already 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning. They should be able to open in another 20 hours. Tomorrow? I heard that it took a few days, and some even took a week to open their eyes. Lu Tiany stood by the side and watched Lin Hao, a big man, feed the baby gently. He didn't feel that it was strange at all. That's an ordinary baby, okay? Lin Hao finished feeding him another mouthful, then raised his eyes to glance at Lu Tiany. The statue seemed to be saying, Do you think this is an ordinary baby? This was a demon infant. Lu Tiany watched for a while and suddenly said, Can I feed it? Lin Hao looked at him again and said coldly, Will you? If he didn't feed it well, and it got dirty everywhere, how annoying would it be? Lu Tiany felt that he was being ignored, but he really wanted to hold this child and feed him. Lin Hao looked at his eager face. Although he felt that it was okay to feed or teach him, Lin Hao just didn't want to give this demon infant to him. Let me do it. I'll just slow down. Besides, Dr. Lin, aren't you busy? Don't you need to check the ward? Don't you need to operate on the patients? Lu Tiany said with a smile. Lin Hao's face darkened when he said that. That's right, he was really busy. There were still 2 surgeries to be done today. When he was busy, he really couldn't take care of this child. At this time, little man opened his mouth and said, Go quickly. It's okay to let little uncle feed me. After Lu Tiany heard his words, he was stunned. Then suddenly his eyes slightly widened, and then he looked at little man with a happy face. He heard the child call him uncle. It was a very subtle feeling. Although he didn't know why this child added the word little, He was a young man in his 20s. Lu Tianyi didn't know that he was the youngest uncle in little man's heart, because there were still Lin Feng and Lin Hao above him. Although he was a little reluctant, Lin Hao handed little man to Lu Tianyi in the end, and told him how to hold the baby, and what to pay attention to. A child's body was soft. The wrong posture would make the child uncomfortable, or cause a burden to the child's fragile bones. So when Lin Hao was nagging about all kinds of things to pay attention to, little man said impatiently, Okay, I know how to talk. If I'm not comfortable, I'll tell little uncle, go quickly. Lin Hao. So angry. She's worried about you, okay? Why do you look like you're disgusted? And you're even frowning. Why does this kid favor Lu Tianyi? He was the one who delivered him, okay? He's also an uncle. So when Wu Qingyue brought Lingling over to see little man, he saw Lu Tianyi holding his son, and smiling like a fool. Damn, if people who didn't know the inside story saw this, they would think that this kid was the child's father. Lingling is here, sensing Wu Qingyue and Wu Yueling's breath. Little man immediately spoke. Once Wu Yueling heard his voice, she immediately trotted over happily. Then Lu Tianyi saw the corner of the little fellow's mouth twitch and stiffen. Little man said speechlessly, Lingling, can we discuss something? Don't call me little man, little brother. It's such an awkward way of addressing me. His voice was full of helplessness. Wu Yueling's eyes were bright as she leaned over to Lu Tianyi and looked at him, the corner of her mouth unknowingly curling up. Wu Qingyue walked over and saw this scene. He said to little man, can you read Lingling's mind? Little man, I want to be called Mama. Hurry up and give me a name. Wu Qingyue smiled at him and said, Why don't you call me? No matter what, I'm still your father. Little man's eyes moved under his eyelids and said, I've already taken your surname. Give the right to name to my mama. Wu Qingyue was startled when he heard this, and then his smile deepened. He didn't object and nodded, okay then. He hadn't heard that the female zombie wanted little man to have the surname Wu. He originally thought that she would directly use her own surname to name the child. Since little man was willing to have the surname Wu, then the name would be given to the female zombie. Suddenly giving birth to such a assertive son, Wu Qingyue, who had just become a father, inexplicably felt that he wouldn't have many benefits in the future. Chapter 983. When Lin Xiao finally finished her work and rushed to the hospital, it was already 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. When she arrived at the hospital, only Wu Qingyue and his daughter were left in the baby's room, and Wu Qingyue was skillfully holding Man in his arms and talking to him. And Wu Yueling also gave up her exclusive position, Wu Qingyue's leg, and was standing beside Wu Qingyue's leg and looking at Man. Seeing Lin Xiao appear at the door in a military uniform and a military hat, with a serious and cold manner, Wu Qingyue raised his head, and a ray of light flashed in his eyes. Even though she had just given birth last night, she had already returned to her original clothes. Her figure was as straight as a sword. Although the brim of the hat slightly covered her eyebrows, it could not cover the sharp light in her eyes. Her long hair was tied at the back of her neck. She was not only serious and cold, but also a little more neat and tidy. After Lin Xiao came in, she took off her hat and handed it to Xin Yuzhen next to her. She also restrained her momentum. She was not surprised to see Wu Qingyue. She walked straight to him, but her eyes did not look at him, but at Man. Let me hold him. She slightly bent down and said expressionlessly while reaching out her hand. Wu Qingyue glanced at her and handed Man to her. At the same time he said, he asked you to give him a name. Lin Xiao took it and wrapped Man's soft body with a thick and soft towel. After hearing Wu Qingyue's words, she glanced at Wu Qingyue. Then she asked Man, what's your request, Man? Man was a little helpless when she was called that. She was too lazy to correct her mother, so she said, well, nothing else. Just the surname Wu is fine. Hearing this, Lin Xiao immediately glanced at Wu Qingyue fiercely. She slightly pursed her lips and did not say anything. Wu Qingyue's heart was blocked by her gaze, and the smile on his face became more serious. He said, I didn't say anything. So it was not him who asked Man Man to have the surname Wu. To be honest, even if Man Man wanted to have the surname Lu now, it did not matter. Anyway, there would be opportunities to change it in the future. Man Man's little hand moved and touched Lin Xiao's collar. She grabbed it and said, "Mama, don't be angry. This is not my father's request. It's me, he's my dad after all. It's not wrong for me to follow his surname. Also, I won't interfere with you naming me." After saying such a long string of words, young Man Man was a little tired, so she stopped to rest for a while. Only then did Lin Xiao's gaze soften. He apologized to Wu Qingyue for his impulsive attitude just now. "I'm sorry." Wu Qingyue nodded, and the smile on his face returned. However, the smile on his face was still a little dimmer than before. He could feel that this female zombie was very possessive of the child. It was as if she had excluded him from a safe area, and then hid the child behind her, not allowing anyone to come close. If he came even a little closer, she would bristle with thorns. Lin Xiao looked at young man and said, "Wait for the real name. Let's give her a nickname first." Little man nodded, then turned her face towards Wu Qingyue. If his eyes were open at this moment, there would definitely be a trace of pity in his eyes. He was his father after all, but now his mother had pulled away from him again. How many years and months would it take to see the two of them together? Could it be that he would have to wait for a few years, until he was old enough to be able to see them showing off their love? Thinking about this, young Man felt very tired. It's easy to give a nickname. You were originally called Little Man, because you are a vine. Since you feel that young Man is a girl, then we'll call you Young Tung. We'll take the word tongue from dragon horse. It's the same sound as tongue from vine. Lin Xiao said to young man with a smile, "Wu Qingyue and Young Tung. Young Tung was fine. What the hell was with Young Tung? It wasn't manly at all, okay?" Lin Xiao didn't care about young man's reaction, but asked Wu Yueling with a smile, "Lingling, how about calling your brother Young Tung?" Wu Yueling looked at Wu Qingyue and young man blankly, not understanding why they had to change their names. But no matter what her brother was called, he was still her brother. She nodded happily. In fact, she didn't care much about the meaning of the name, and whether it sounded good or not. At this time, young Man finally came back to her senses, and wanted to save her spoiled nickname. "Mama, call him Young Tung. Don't call him Young Tung." Lin Xiao felt her depressed mood, and couldn't help but laugh. Cough, okay. Young Tung it is. So young Man's nickname was changed to Young Tung. Shen Yuzhen looked at the child in Lin Xiao's arms with a smile, but a trace of envy and sadness flashed in her eyes. Originally, she had the chance to have a child with Chen Yuding, but she didn't expect that she didn't even dare to be intimate with Chen Yuding. If she could have a child like the leader, how good would that be? But she also knew that the leader was different from her. But now that she saw Young Tung, Shen Yuzhen was envious, but at the same time, there was a faint hope. Maybe the leader could help her do this? Even if she knew that it might be very difficult. But Shen Yuzhen's heart was like a seed that didn't die, and it began to appear in her heart. Shen Yuzhen's eyes were a little unfocused, and Lin Xiao seemed to look at her unintentionally. She could feel Shen Yuzhen's thoughts and desires, and could also feel her feelings for Chen Yuding, and the feeling that she owed Chen Yuding. Because Chen Yuding didn't abandon her after she became a zombie, Lin Xiao retracted her gaze as if nothing had happened, and asked Young Tung, "Is the milk that I asked someone to bring you this morning tasty?" Young Tung smacked his lips and said in a childish voice, "It's all right. Just a little fishy." Lin Xiao said, "This is fresh goat's milk, so it's normal to have a fishy smell. But I used the energy lake water to adjust it for you. Is it still fishy? Why didn't I feel it when I tried it?" After she squeezed the goat's milk, she used the energy lake water to adjust it. When she drank it, she didn't feel any taste, nor did she smell any fishy smell. Or could it be that this child's sense of smell or taste was more sensitive than hers? Young Ting said, "Just a little." When Wu Qingyue heard their words, the smile on his face faded. He frowned with some doubt and asked, "Goat's milk? I remember that your base doesn't have any livestock. Where did you get the fresh goat's milk?" This all-living base only had a planting base, and currently there was no breeding base. Not to mention cows, goats, and pigs. There weren't even chickens, ducks, and geese. Now that he heard Lin Xiao say that she didn't know where she got the goat's milk from, although he knew that she wouldn't give something harmful to the child. But he didn't know where the milk came from, so he felt a little uneasy. Lin Xiao looked at him and immediately understood his thoughts. Don't worry, young Tung has his own system to differentiate food. If it's food that's not good for him, he won't eat it. Young Ting nodded at the side and very maturely agreed with his mother. NN, that's right, that's right. Don't worry, Dad. Chapter 984. Wu Qingyue naturally knew about Xiao Tung's ability to distinguish food. It wasn't that he doubted the ability of this female zombie. He just wanted to break the feeling of being excluded. Wu Qingyue's eyes darkened as he turned his head to the side. His gaze fell on Xiao Tung's small bed and he said, "That's not what I meant." As his son's father, he didn't even know the source of his son's food. He felt that he had failed in his duty. And what hurt him was Lin Xiao's attitude towards him. It wasn't that she didn't understand. She clearly knew how he felt about her. She even felt the same way about herself. But why did he just keep dodging? What did he do to displease her? Was he not good enough? The more Wu Qingyue thought about it, the more depressed he felt. It was suffocating. Want to be angry, want to rage. However, his rationality told him to calm down and not lose his temper. Otherwise, it would only push her further and further away. Lin Xiao, who was carrying Xiao Tung, did not say anything after hearing Wu Qingyue's words. After a few seconds of silence, Wu Qingyue suddenly stood up. He pulled Lingling out of the room. You just gave birth last night. You should pay attention to rest. When he walked to the door, Wu Qingyue left a sentence and went out. Lin Xiao watched as he left with an inexplicable sense of depression. He didn't understand how his emotions changed so quickly. She lowered her head and asked Xiao Tung. He seems to be angry again. What happened? Xiao Tung sighed and said, It's all because of you. Lin Xiao looked at him and asked inexplicably, What does it have to do with me? Xiao Tung said, Because you'll throw it away after using it. Father is so pitiful, Lin Xiao. What the hell? You still have the nerve to say that. It's all because of you. You're the one who threw it away after using it. Lin Xiao pinched his little face in annoyance. Oh, you're right. Xiao Ting immediately backed down. After all, he was the one who tied the two of them together for the sake of absorbing energy. But my father is so good. Why don't you like him? What was so bad about his father? Wasn't he handsome? Was he not strong enough? Was he in a bad shape? Was his personality that bad? Thinking about it, there weren't many young, handsome, gentle, and powerful men like him. Xiao Ting thought to himself, I don't know why my mama doesn't like it. Oh, that's not right. It's not that I don't like it. She had clearly taken a liking to him in her heart, but she had to pretend that she hadn't. Lin Xiao was stunned by his question, and his eyes darkened. She said, Now I don't want to live a life where I have to worry about my family and let another man control my thoughts. She was also tired. Wasn't it good to be like this? It would be great if he had a family and a son. She didn't need anyone to rely on. She was her own reliance. But aren't you tired? I think, Mommy, your thinking is a little off. Daddy is not a trouble for you. He can be your wall. You can lean on that wall when you're tired. Xiao Ting couldn't speak for too long now. After saying such a long sentence, he started to pant again. He suddenly understood his mother's thoughts, but he didn't understand why she thought so. Lin Xiao looked at him and was stunned. Her heart moved slightly, but she quickly suppressed it. Because she had always relied on herself since she was young. She never relied on others. She never let her parents worry about her good grades. Even if she was bullied in school, she would solve it herself. She never relied on her big brother Lin Feng. After graduating from military school and joining the army, she thought of solving all kinds of problems by herself when she went on missions. She protected all the team members behind her. Even if she had 2 boyfriends, she wouldn't show her weak side in front of the other party. So now that Xiao Ting asked her to find someone to lean on and rest, she felt moved for a moment. Because she would also collapse from exhaustion. Your mommy, I'm so strong. Even if I rest, I'll rest alone. I don't need to rely on others. Lin Xiao said to Xiao Teng with a smile. All right, you don't need to rest, but I do. I'm so sleepy I'm going to sleep. After saying that, Xiao Teng put down his hands and hid his face, preparing to sleep. Lin Xiao put him on the bed and lifted it to see if his diaper was wet. Then, she went into the space to milk the child again. Since Xiao Teng could talk, he would say it if he wanted to pee. After milking the baby, she brought it to the small building and boiled it with the lake water. Only then did Lin Xiao leave the space. While Xiao Teng slept, Lin Xiao sat in the baby's room. She slowly flipped through the documents that Xin Yuzhen brought for her, while paying attention to the movements on the bed and Xiao Teng's sleeping posture. Children's sleep patterns were irregular. They were easily tired and could easily sleep their fill. So when Xiao Teng woke up again, only 2 hours had passed. Mommy, I need to pee. Xiao Teng stretched out his little hand and waved in Lin Xiao's direction when he woke up. Lin Xiao raised his head from the documents and immediately put them aside. Then, she carried Xiao Teng to the bathroom and separated his legs to let him pee. Mommy, don't look. Xiao Teng looked a little embarrassed. His little face was suspiciously pink. Lin Xiao said speechlessly, You're my son. Are you afraid that I'll look at your little piss? Moreover, I'll take you back when I'm discharged in 2 days. I'll still have to help you bathe every day. It's just peeing. What's there to be afraid of? You're still a baby, do you know that? Xiao Teng. He was speechless. What should he do? But he would still be shy, okay? Thinking that he would have to be bathed by his mommy again and again in the future, Xiao Teng could only sigh helplessly. Then he began to release the water. Lin Xiao stayed in the baby's room for a night. She absorbed the energy core, while paying attention to Xiao Teng's movements. The next day, when she finished absorbing the 5th corpse core in her hand early in the morning, she opened her eyes and saw a pair of big bright eyes looking at her. You opened your eyes? Lin Xiao hugged him happily. She asked, Are you hungry, or do you need to pee first? Xiao Teng, who had been holding back for a while, was about to ask his mommy to take him to pee. However, he saw that his mommy had almost finished absorbing the energy. He waited for a while. I need to pee. Lin Xiao smiled as she picked him up and brought him to the bathroom. When she came out, she saw that the door of the baby's room was open. Xiadong and Lin Hao were standing at the door waiting. Lin Xiao looked at him without surprise. Then, she put Xiao Teng on the bed and said, Xiao Teng's eyes are open. I'll take him out of the hospital today. Lin Hao, get ready. Oh, so fast. Although he knew that his nephew was not simple, it was normal for him to be discharged now. However, he looked at Xiao Teng with a bit of reluctance. Now that he was discharged from the hospital, he would have to go to base 2 to see his nephew. Chapter 985. After handing Xiao Teng to Lin Hao, Lin Xiao took Xiadong out of the nursery. Xiadong didn't come here to see the baby. He must have some special or urgent information to tell her. Go ahead. When they reached the end of the corridor, Lin Xiao asked Xiadong to report the situation. Xiadong said, The information in Sea City has been leaked. Lin Xiao's eyes flashed and she asked, What information? About the planting land. They've been found out to be fake. It was the people from Wuxia who found out, and they've already sent the news back, Xiadong said. Lin Xiao didn't look surprised. Instead, she said calmly, Wuxia is quite fast. There weren't many people in her base, so it was much easier to keep the secret. But Sea City was so big, we didn't have people among the hundreds of thousands of people, so it was only a matter of time before the news was leaked. Lin Xiao didn't think they could keep it a secret forever. Do they know anything else besides this information? Lin Xiao asked. For example, did the people from Wuxia find out where Sea City's food came from? Since they found out about the soil quality of Sea City's planting base, they must know that Sea City still provided a small amount of fresh vegetables every day. In that case, the other party would definitely investigate in this direction by following the vines to the melon. Needless to say, if the other party really found out about the source of these vegetables, then the secret of her base would be exposed. Sooner or later, her base would also be targeted, and it wouldn't be as simple as being affected. Xiadong shook his head. Not yet. but they do want to continue investigating in this direction. It was just that the people in Sea City noticed and covered up the traces in time, so they didn't find out. Lin Xiao nodded. Thanks to their quick reaction, but I believe they won't be able to suppress it for long. We need to make some preparations here. Did Sea City catch those spies? Most of them were caught, but a few fish were missed. That's why the news was spread to Wuxia. Wuxia is now preparing to send another group of people into Sea City to continue investigating. Xiaodong told her the information truthfully. Lin Xiao stood there with her arms crossed in front of her chest. She raised her right hand and rubbed her chin, analyzing the situation. Since Haiqing had reacted in time and caught the spies, there was no guarantee that they had not discovered other than a few fish that escaped back to Wuxia. Since this group of people hadn't been discovered, they wouldn't make any moves for the time being, lest they were discovered by the people of Sea City. On the other hand, if China wanted to send another group of people to investigate, they might have to contact the corpse hunters from Sea City. Even if they couldn't sneak in with these corpse hunters, they might be able to cooperate with these corpse hunters and have them go in to investigate. Of course, if they didn't cooperate, in that case, they could also take tough measures to make them do it. However, all of this required time. However, as long as one wasn't an idiot, with the close working relationship between Ocean City and the Universal Life Base, they would probably have their suspicions. He believed that even if Xikong Chen's movements weren't fast, they shouldn't be slow either. Keep an eye on China and Skyfire Base. Report back immediately if anything happens. Lin Xiao lowered his eyes and touched his chin. After pondering for a while, he spoke without changing his expression. He waved his hand at Xiaodong, telling him to call it a day. Yes, sir. Xiaodong's expression grew solemn. He nodded, then turned and left. After Lin Xiao said this, he remained in his original position and thought for a while. Then he let go and walked back to the nursery. Send out the order. At 2 in the afternoon, all the executives are to gather in the first meeting hall. Lin Xiao said to Shen Yuzhen, then went in. Yes. Shen Yuzhen had already left after receiving the instructions. She hurriedly went to make a notice. Once inside the nursery, Lin Xiao asked her, "What's going on?" She was going to tell everyone to gather in the first meeting hall. Lin Xiao knew things weren't as simple as they seemed. Conference Hall Number 1 was the largest conference hall in Base Number 1. Under normal circumstances, Lin Xiao would not hold a meeting there. It was usually held in the smaller meeting hall, or in the second base's meeting hall. Haiqing's smokescreen has been broken. China knows Haiqing can't grow food. It's just that they haven't found out about us yet. I need to make arrangements as soon as possible. Lin Xiao walked over and began to pack the things Xiaoting needed. When Lin Xiao heard this, he knew the situation wasn't good for Base All. He thought for a moment and asked, "Will China target us?" The things in Lin Xiao's hands disappeared and were thrown into the space. She glanced at him. "Do you think Xikong Chen won't consider us based on our current cooperation with Haiqing?" Lin Xiao nodded. "Oh, that's true." After packing for a while, Lin Xiao carried Xiaotung out of the medical center. She returned to the dormitory in Base 2 and began her life as a nanny. When she went to the office to work, she put Xiaotung on the sofa. Anyway, this child could only move now. Of course, he wouldn't be like an ordinary child who would cry and scream at the slightest provocation. Moreover, Xiaoting could ask for anything he needed. Therefore, Lin Xiao threw him on the sofa and laid him down. Xiaoting looked at his little hands in boredom. He could still raise and move them a little, and he could still kick his legs a little, but he couldn't crawl or walk. His bones were still too soft. However, he could drink milk, which meant that he could grow like a normal baby. Looking at the speed at which he opened his eyelids, he might grow faster than others in the future. Xiaoting wasn't in a hurry, but he still wanted to be able to move freely sooner or later. He should move his hands and feet more and treat it as training. Therefore, in the quiet leader's office, Lin Xiao lowered his head and worked with a pen. From time to time, he would look up at Xiaotung on the sofa. However, when he saw the kid stomping his feet and waving his hands, the image of the kid swinging around with vines on his head flashed in his mind. In the afternoon, Lin Xiao brought the meeting materials. He carried Xiaoteng to base 1 and prepared for the meeting. Before arriving at the conference hall, Lin Xiao didn't let Xiaoteng appear in front of everyone. Instead, he placed him on the sofa in the small building in the space and let him lie there for a while. There is only one topic for today's meeting. It is to prepare for war. From today onwards, there will be at least 1 to 2 months as a buffer period. Sitting in the main seat, Lin Xiao took off his hat and put it on the table beside him. Then, he placed his elbows on the table and clasped his fingers in front of his face. A pair of sharp eyes slowly swept across everyone's faces. Chapter 986. It had been a few months since they had seen Lin Xiao in her military uniform. Those who didn't know why she had been wearing a loose dress for the past few months. Those who knew were expressionless, and there was nothing strange about them. Yuan Tianqing's expression had calmed down a lot. Hearing Lin Xiao's words, everyone was stunned. She continued, Haiqing and China have fallen out. China must be keeping an eye on Haiqing to find its weakness. Now that the situation of Sea City's plantation base was known to China, Xikong Chen's main goal was to know the source of fresh food in Sea City. I believe that it won't be long before they find out about us. Everyone then realized the seriousness of the matter. What was the most important thing in the post-apocalyptic world? Food was the most important thing now. Since the mutated soil couldn't be eaten, even if China wanted to deal with Haiqing, they had to solve their own food problem before taking any action. However, he definitely couldn't stop gathering information. As long as they had enough time, they would be able to use all sorts of methods to get information from Haiqing. Haiqing had to defend against the underground creatures and the mutated rat nests. Now there was the threat of China. They were facing enemies on 3 fronts. With their current military strength, the humans couldn't even think about it. Small skirmishes were fine, but if the other party sent a large army, they could only rely on the zombie army. Now we have to investigate all the suspicious characters in the base to prevent the possibility of being betrayed. Chen Yuding will handle this matter. After that, Yuan Tianqing, you'll have to increase the patrols around the base. Keep an eye on the area within 5 kilometers of the base. In addition, Xiadong, send people to keep an eye on the zombie hunting teams that leave the city. If you see them outside the base, bring them back immediately. Elmar, your task is to keep an eye on the underground creatures. Don't worry about this matter for now. Lin Xiao said. There weren't many zombie hunting teams in Haiqing. There were only a few dozen of them. It wasn't difficult to send people to keep an eye on them when they left the base. The zombie army would be trained by Xiadong, while Elmar and Qiu Lily would suppress them. As for the human army, Yuan Tianqing would personally lead Li Zheng, and the rest to train and suppress them. The internal affairs of the other bases were mostly handed over to Chen Yuding, Du Yuanxing, and the others. Because the base was still very small, Lin Xiao had not separated the military headquarters. He could only wait until the base had more than 30,000 people. There were only a few thousand people now, so there wasn't much to divide. The number of people in the army, including ordinary people and ability users, was less than 3,000. The remaining 2,000 people were mostly women, the elderly, the disabled, and the dozens of corpse hunters. Although Yuan Tianqing had gathered 3 ordinary zombie regiments from the human army, compared to Lin Xiao's 3 ordinary zombie regiments, they were not enough to deal with the zombies. On one side, ordinary humans made up 90% of the population, while arcanists only made up 10%. On one side were level 3 and 4 zombies. There was no comparison at all. Then, Sea City. Who will go? Lin Feng asked with a frown. Since Sea City had already spread the news, they would definitely have to make a new deployment plan. Now that they were in the same boat as Sea City, they would definitely send people to discuss countermeasures with Sea City. Even if he couldn't come up with ideas, he still had to be present to listen. You go. Lin Xiao glanced at him. When she was assigning tasks, she didn't mention Lin Feng. She was waiting for him here. So you're waiting for me here. Lin Feng glanced at her expressionlessly. If not you, who else do you think is more suitable? Lin Xiao shrugged. She was the only leader in the base, and the two deputy leaders were Lin Feng and Yuan Tianxing. Yuan Tianxing had to keep an eye on the movements outside the base, so the one to go to Sea City could only be Lin Feng. Oh, that's fine. I remember someone still owes me a meal. Maybe I can bring Xiao Lu and Wang Shui over for a meal. Lin Feng nodded. She recalled Wu Qingyue saying that his wife and daughter often helped him take care of his daughter, so she wanted to treat them to a meal. After the meeting ended, Lin Xiao walked out of the conference hall and boarded the car to return to Base 2. When she arrived at the office, she carried shouting out. The kid had fallen asleep again, his eyes closed as he breathed lightly through his nose. Lin Xiao sniffed his breath and didn't wake him up. Instead, she placed him on the sofa and continued to sleep. Xiaoteng's breath was a bit strange. It didn't feel like a human's breath at all. She didn't know if it was caused by the virus in his blood, but she didn't sense the same kind of connection between zombies from him. So this kid was like a human among humans, but among zombies, zombies wouldn't care about him. Lin Xiao was a zombie and didn't need to eat, so she buried herself in work. Xiaoteng, on the other hand, would be hungry. When he woke up, his stomach rumbled again. Mama, I'm hungry. When he opened his eyes, he could only see the ceiling. Xiaoteng knew that he was lying on a sofa again. He turned his head and looked around. It was Mama's office. He felt the presence of Mama's breath in the air, and immediately called out. Lin Xiao raised her head and put down the pen in her hand. Then she got up and walked over, then flashed into her space. She took out the remaining milk from the moisturizing bottle and fed it to Xiaoteng. After feeding him, she had to go in to milk the sheep again. Fortunately, the grass in her space was rich in energy. These sheep and roe deer were all very strong and had enough milk. After feeding, Lin Xiao hugged Xiaoteng and gently patted his back for a while. Then, she continued to work, leaving Xiaoteng to lie on the sofa alone. Having a workaholic mama was also very tiring. On the other side, Wu Qingyue sat in his room, listening to Li Yushan's report on Haicheng. He frowned, but there was no expression on his face. There was a hint of coldness in his eyes. Since the news has been leaked, then make sure to cover up the source of the food, he said faintly. Although he knew that the people from China would find out about this sooner or later, he didn't expect it to be so fast. This could only mean that the other party's methods were smarter than his side. This made Wu Qingyue very unhappy. But what made him unhappy the most was that it was actually because of that female zombie. So at this time, the people from China bumped into him again. Fine, why didn't he burn it himself? Xiao Liqing and Li Yushan saw his expression and knew that their boss was in a bad mood. But because of what? It was definitely not because of Haicheng. The two of them thought instinctively. Chapter 987. Lin Xiao couldn't help but be urged to leave early by Xiaoteng, so she carried Xiaoteng back to her dorm room at around 9. She hadn't even stepped through the door when a familiar scent wafted from her room. Lin Xiao couldn't help but roll her eyes. That was enough. Why did this man keep sneaking into her room? She opened the door to find Wu Qingyue sitting on the sofa again. Lin Xiao stared at the bottle of wine on the table. It wasn't hers, but he'd come to her room with a bottle of wine. What was the meaning of this? Wouldn't it be better to make a plate of peanuts to go with the wine? Lin Xiao said softly as she carried the sleeping Xiaoteng into the bedroom. Wu Qingyue's face was expressionless. He rose to his feet when Lin Xiao entered. Is he asleep? His voice was husky, but his tone was light. Lin Xiao nodded as she walked over. After a while, she closed the door behind her and sat down on the sofa. She looked at him and said coolly, "Can you change your habit of coming into my room without an invitation? You're a leader, aren't you embarrassed? It's just that you're not there every time." Who would dare tell him about this? Besides, not many people knew he'd come in here. Lin Xiao couldn't be bothered to continue when she saw he was trying to play dumb. She pursed her lips and changed the subject. "Then what are you here for?" Wu Qingyue poured a glass of wine for himself, then poured a glass for her, and pushed it over. "As far as I know, China might have their eyes on you because of your relationship with Haicheng. Also, Skyfire Base has been keeping an eye on you for a while now. Have you noticed?" Lin Xiao's eyes darkened. "I know. she said calmly. They've been keeping an eye on us. She'd noticed since the last time she and Wu Qinghua had gone to China to help. No one from Skyfire Base had shown up. When Gu Yikong showed up, she'd had Xie Dong send people to keep an eye on Skyfire Base. Li Jingye thinks China is after Haicheng. He wants a piece of the action, but he doesn't want to get himself involved. They just want to watch Wuxia and Haicheng fight, so that they can fish in troubled waters. Wu Qinghua picked up his glass and took a sip before saying, although they expressed their support for Wuxia on the surface, it's actually just spiritual support. Lin Xiao snorted coldly and said, this Li Jingye has always liked to fish in troubled waters. This was in line with Skyfire's style. Coupled with Gu Yikong and He Mu's disappearance, Li Jingye would not dare to make any big moves. I'm afraid I'll be implicated, but I still covet it. Her next target was Skyfire Base, and she was afraid he wouldn't show up. Only by killing Li Jingye and destroying Skyfire Base's systems would he be able to avenge Hades. Considering that there were still hundreds of thousands of ordinary survivors in the Heavenly Fire Base, Lin Xiao did not intend to destroy the entire base. At the very least, it would give those ordinary people a way out. Wu Qinghua didn't say anything. He just took a sip of wine in silence. Lin Xiao looked at him and asked, you came here just to tell me this? Wu Qinghua looked at the wine in his hand and asked, who are you going to send to Haicheng? Lin Feng, Lin Xiao said. I heard you owe him a meal. Wu Qinghua nodded, his expression impassive. That's right. That's fine. I'll treat him to a good meal. He'll bring his wife and child, Lin Xiao said. You'd better be prepared. After saying this, the two of them fell silent again. One drank mouthful after mouthful of wine, while the other sat motionlessly without saying a word. After a while, Wu Qinghua couldn't take it anymore. They weren't more than 2 meters apart, but it felt like they were hundreds of meters apart. He said, have you thought about the baby's name? Lin Xiao nodded. Yes. Wu Qinghua lifted his head to look at her, an indescribable emotion in his eyes. What's it going to be called? He'd agreed not to interfere with the baby's naming, so of course he wouldn't interfere. Even if she said it wasn't a good name, he wouldn't say anything. It would be great if it was up. He just wanted to know. Lin Xiao looked at him for a moment, then spat out 3 words. Wu Qiding. It means to soar. His original form is a vine, so I changed the vine into the tongue. Wu Qinghua was startled, then nodded. Good name. His son's surname was Wu, and he was called Wu Qiding. Hearing these 3 words, a strange and subtle feeling spread from his heart. He couldn't help but look at Lin Xiao's bedroom door. He didn't have any objections to the name Lin Xiao gave him. He even felt relieved, at least the name wasn't bad. If this female zombie gave his son a bad name, then he wasn't sure if he would really not interfere. The two of them were silent for a few seconds. Then Lin Xiao couldn't help but ask, is there anything else? Wu Qinghua looked at her, the corner of his mouth slightly pursed. Then he said unwillingly, what, you're even annoyed to be alone with me now? You've really wronged me before. Lin Xiao looked at him without saying anything. She had been sitting, and didn't stand up to leave in order to save his face. Wu Qinghua looked at her like this. The anger that he had just suppressed rose again. He put the glass on the table, both elbows on his knees, but the words that came out of his mouth were very frustrated. Is it really impossible for me and you? Why are you always like this? Not even giving me a chance. As if using the last bit of strength to finish the last sentence, Wu Qinghua suddenly raised a hand to cover his face. He really thought that after the child was born, at least for the sake of the child, this female zombie's attitude towards him would be more relaxed. This female zombie's attitude towards him would loosen up a bit. Even if she didn't want to accept him for the time being, she probably wouldn't reject him again. But her attitude these 2 days made Wu Qinghua's heart cold. Then he became at a loss. Even if he was a man, he would still get tired. He had been pestering her for so long, just to find a way to get close to her heart. But along the way he almost gave up a few times, because he couldn't see any hope. In these 2 or 3 months, he finally found that her attitude had softened. But in the blink of an eye, she hit her heart again, shrinking into her shell. Then no matter how he tried to get close to her, he was isolated. And this time, after the child was born, she was no longer restricted around him. In just a short 2 days, she was like a kite that was broken by the wind, making him look up at the distance that was getting farther and farther away. He was really tired. His heart was also very painful. Chapter 988. Lin Xiao didn't see his face, but she was startled by the gloomy atmosphere around him. At this moment, she felt that Wu Qingyue was like a lost child. Panic and helplessness, fear, and not knowing what to do. He could only wait for someone to save him. He'd been able to keep a distance from her a while ago. Why was he like this all of a sudden? Wu Qingyue's emotions were real, and it was the first time Lin Xiao had sensed his emotions. This man was always smiling, scheming, calm, and powerful. She had never expected him to reveal such an expression. Lin Xiao was caught off guard. She stared at him blankly for 2 seconds, then said, "Don't tell me you're crying? Are you a 3-year-old?" Wu Qingyue was speechless. The sad atmosphere was gone. He didn't think she'd say something like that. "Can't you just let me pretend to be sad for a while?" Wu Qingyue put his hand down and looked at her helplessly. "I'm going back to Haiqing tomorrow. Aren't you going to say something?" He didn't plan on taking the child to Haiqing, even though he didn't trust the female zombie to take care of the child. But if he asked, she wouldn't agree. "Oh, take care, I won't see you out." Lin Xiao immediately stood up and went to the door in a flash. He opened the door and gestured for them to go out. Wu Qingyue was speechless. Why did he fall in love with this female zombie? Yes, he fell in love. It wasn't just love. The heartache was real. If he hadn't fallen in love, he wouldn't have felt suffocated. Sighing, Wu Qingyue stood up and walked out of Lin Xiao's house. No matter how tired he was, he didn't want to give up. Lin Xiao watched Wu Qingyue leave. She closed the door and her eyes dimmed. She heaved a sigh of relief and looked back at the wine glass on the table. On the other hand, in the leader's quarters of Skyfire Base, Li Jingye sat on the sofa. There were 4 other people in the room. They sat on other sofas and chairs. That means Haiqing can't grow food at all. But they still have fresh vegetables and melons every day. So where did their fresh food come from? Li Jingye furrowed his brows and bent his back. His elbows rested on his spread knees, and his fingers rested on his chin. Do they have a secret base? Or could it be that these plants are not grown from the soil? Mo Quan, one of the deputy leaders, guessed hesitantly. Before the apocalypse, many planting technologies had already developed soilless cultivation of vegetables. Perhaps Haiqing wasn't grown from soil. Li Jingye was stunned for a moment, and then his eyes flashed. That's a very high possibility. Has Sea City actually found a scientist who knows this technology? The others looked at each other and nodded in agreement. I think it's possible. Haiqing was really cunning. Previously, they had used something like the ability to purify the land to deceive the Chinese people and mess up their direction. Are you trying to use this to conceal the true cultivation technique? Another person said, Isn't Wuxia known as the technological base with the most scientists and technicians? They don't have such technicians? Even if they do, they won't reveal it, said Li Jingye lightly. Because they need a reason to deal with Haiqing. You mean? No wonder Wuxia was so calm after they fell out with Haiqing. It turns out that they aren't interested in the technology to purify the land. Mo Quan suddenly realized. Hasn't the news of the universal base come out yet? At this time, Li Jingye looked at another person and asked. That person shook his head and said, This new base's defense is very tight, and the corpse hunters that go in and out are also very vigilant. Most of them are unwilling to cooperate. As for those that cooperate with us, they returned to the universal base after we first came into contact with them and never came out again. I don't know if they were discovered, or if they were afraid of being discovered, so they didn't make a move. Li Jingye thought about it and said, It's been more than 2 months, but there's still no news. It seems that this woman is really not simple. She dared to cripple Hu Jiong's hand in front of so many leaders, yet she's still safe and sound. She's definitely not a simple person. Mo Quan also frowned and asked suspiciously, But when Hu Jiong died, he was indeed swallowed by the black fire. Why does this sound like the ability of that woman in the Hades base? Could it be the same type? As soon as he mentioned this, everyone's faces darkened. Li Jingye frowned and said gloomily, That woman is definitely dead. But to be able to assassinate a rank 7 metahuman, the level of the killer is definitely not low. At least rank 7. Which base has a rank 7 Blackfire metahuman now? Everyone shook their heads. Even that woman in the universal base. Her ability is only black poison mist. There really isn't anyone with black fire. Forget it. Let's continue to watch the universal base. Since those corpse hunters aren't willing to cooperate, we can use force. Li Jingye said at this time. Should we catch them? Mo Quan asked. Li Jingye nodded. We should be able to dig out something from their mouths. A few days later, the universal base and the few corpse hunters that went out with them disappeared inexplicably. Their hands and feet were tied, and their bodies were limp, and they couldn't feel a trace of energy in their bodies. When Mo Chichi opened her eyes, she calmly observed her surroundings. She was in a room that looked like an office, and the sunlight outside the room was a little orange. It should be evening. The tables and chairs in the room were placed in a messy position, and from the decorations on the table, it could be seen that the place was in a panic. A thick layer of dust had fallen on the table, indicating that no one had been here for a long time. Mo Chichi looked around, and there was no one else other than herself. The doors and windows were also closed, and there were some footprints on the ground, telling her that someone had been here before. She sat up against the wall, and there was a numbing pain in her leg. She remembered that before she fainted, she was shot with an anesthetic needle in her leg. When she fell, everyone else fell with her, and then her vision became blurry. At this time, the door opened, and an unfamiliar man's voice rang out. Yo, Beauty is awake. The other party called her Beauty, but it didn't mean that Mo Chichi was a beauty. It was because there were very few women in the apocalypse, and young girls were called beauties. In fact, it was just a title. Mo Chichi looked up and saw an unfamiliar man wearing a baseball cap, loose camouflage clothes, and thick-soled military shoes walking over. Chapter 989. Mo Chichi looked at the man expressionlessly, her eyes calm. The man looked very ordinary, with a very dark face. He was probably tanned from being outside a lot. However, the man was very tall, and when he walked in, he looked like a giant with an oppressive aura. I thought you would shout, "Who are you?" The man walked in front of Mo Chichi, then squatted down and looked at her with a smile. Mo Chichi just looked at him coldly, her lips pressed into a straight line, and she didn't say anything. Seeing her like this, the man just sneered. He said, "If you want your companions to live, then answer my questions obediently. Otherwise, they might be thrown out to feed the zombies." Mo Chichi then said coldly, "What do you want to know?" The man immediately smiled proudly and said, "Hey, that's right. As long as you are willing to cooperate, naturally we won't do anything to you. First, how many people does the base have now? Apart from the level 7 female leader, and the 2 level 6 deputy leaders, how many other level 6 arcanists have submitted to the universal base?" Mo Chichi looked at him, sat up straight, and leaned against the wall with her legs bent. He said to him, "You have 2 questions. Can you exchange them for 2 of my team members?" The man shook his head and said, "No, I can only give you 1. Mo Chichi glared at him coldly, but she didn't show any excitement. She nodded and said, "Okay, 1 then. I want to see people." She knew that now was not the time to talk terms with the man. She was the one being controlled, and the man could give as many people as he wanted. It wasn't up to her. The man's eyes flashed, then he stood up with a smile. He nodded and clapped his hands. "Okay." The sound of footsteps could be heard from outside the door. 2 men in field combat clothes pushed a man whose hands were tied behind his back. "Chichi, are you okay?" The man with his hands tied immediately showed a look of joy when he saw Mo Chichi. He looked at her excitedly and asked with concern. Mo Chichi sat at the foot of the wall, looked up at him and nodded. "I'm fine." The man who was brought in was the vice captain of Mo Chichi's corpse hunting team, Do Yunfan. The man standing in front of Mo Chichi smiled and looked down at her. "Okay, you can answer now." Mo Chichi looked at him and said, "I don't know." A cold light flashed in the man's eyes, and his killing intent directly pressed down on Mo Chichi. "Do you want him to die?" Emochichi leaned against the wall and raised her chin. However, he said calmly, I didn't say that I would answer your question. And what I said was the truth. I don't know. The man pulled out his gun and aimed it at Do Yunfan's face. Although he was pointing his gun at the hostage, his eyes narrowed dangerously at Emochichi. I'll ask again. How many people are there in the Universal Base? Who are the level 6 Arcanists? Emochichi looked at him contemptuously and said, The military has always been a secret. How could I know? Moreover, I've only joined this new base for less than 3 months. How could I know such confidential information? Is there something wrong with your brain? The last sentence was actually disdainfully calling men mentally retarded. You. Very good. It seems that you don't care about your companions at all. The man glared at Emochichi and shouted. However, before he finished speaking, he was interrupted by Do Yunfan. He shouted at Emochichi, Chichi, don't care about us. You run. He knew that with Emochichi's strength, it would not be difficult for her to escape alone. But if she did it for them, then it would be troublesome. Every time they went out to hunt zombies, everyone was prepared to die. So it didn't matter if they died under the claws of zombies or in the hands of these unknown people. None of them were afraid or timid. You shut up. The man was interrupted, immediately scolded, and then pulled the trigger. Bang! At the same time, Emochichi, who was leaning against the wall softly, suddenly jumped up and rolled on the ground. She didn't know when she broke free from her hands that were previously hidden behind her back. As soon as she moved, her right hand instantly swung toward Do Yunfan. A few sparkling and translucent rays of light shot out. At the same time, after her body rolled, a silver light flashed, and the rope on her feet was released. Emochichi rolled out and swept a leg toward the tall man's lower body. The man did not expect Emochichi to suddenly move in this situation, and was immediately swept away by Emochichi's kick. At this time, the bullet that flew toward Do Yunfan had already turned into an ice bullet. But when it hit Do Yunfan's body, it shattered into a pile of ice powder. Puff pu dash, 2 muffled sounds were heard. The 2 people behind Do Yunfan grunted at the same time and fell down. Do Yunfan looked back and saw that the 2 people had a bloody hole in their necks. There was also a transparent ice rhombus sticking out of the bloody hole. After the tall man fell to the ground, he immediately reacted and rolled on the ground, quickly escaping from Emochichi's attack range. At the same time, the gun in his hand immediately turned back and fired 3 bullets at Emochichi. Bang 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 dash. Emochichi had already noticed it the moment he turned his gun around. He immediately turned around and rolled behind a nearby desk, using it as a cover. The man saw Emochichi's nimble movements and knew that he was at a disadvantage. He did not stay any longer and retreated to the door, while shooting at Do Yunfan unwillingly. He thought that even if he failed, he would drag someone down with him. He did not know why the drug that suppressed Emochichi's ability had disappeared so quickly. But now was not the time to find out. Do Yunfan felt the danger and immediately dodged to the door. The bullet grazed his arm and hit the wall outside the door. At this time, the man heard a piercing sound in his ear and subconsciously turned his head. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a sharp icicle flying towards him, bringing with it a hint of coldness. The tall man did not have time to think and immediately jumped and rolled on the ground. But just as he rolled on the ground, he felt a sharp pain in his leg. He realized that one of the icicles had pierced into his leg. Just when the man thought that it was just an icicle, he felt a sudden numbness in his leg. Suddenly, he felt an icy numbness in his injured leg, and then he lost all feeling in his leg. Ha! The man turned his head to look at his leg, and saw that a layer of ice had formed on his thigh. Losing the feeling in one of his legs made the man a little flustered. At this time, he was lying on the ground, guarding against Emochichi, while using his elbow to push forward to find cover. But as soon as he moved, the frozen leg suddenly became lighter. Bang! The sound of ice breaking rang out at the same time. Chapter 990. As soon as the man turned his head, he saw a scene that made his eyes pop out. His leg, which had been frozen into a block of ice, shattered into pieces. A dash! Although he could no longer feel his leg, the impact of seeing this scene made the man scream in horror. At this moment, there was a flurry of footsteps outside the door, and a group of people was quickly coming this way. Emochichi had a bad feeling in her heart, and it was not good to stay here for long. She immediately turned and quickly flashed to the side of the window, opened the window, and immediately jumped out. As soon as her figure disappeared, a group of people immediately appeared at the door and rushed in with guns. On another building not far from this office building, a figure stood behind a dark cover and stared at the situation here. This was a zombie, wearing a camouflage military uniform for field operations, and his eyes were black without any white. His face was pale and blue, and if it wasn't for the 2 pieces of white paper in his nostrils, he would be quite decent. Of course, he didn't block his nose to stop the nosebleed, but because the group of people he was staring at smelled too bad. Seeing Emochichi and Do Yunfan escape, this zombie didn't help them. This was because his mission still needed to listen to their conversation to determine the situation before he could make the next move. If these people were forced to not say anything about the universal base, then his mission would be to save them. But if they were forced to say anything about the universal base, then his mission would be to kill them. After seeing Emochichi successfully escape, the zombie felt that there might be no need for him to intervene in the next matter. But this group of people who were kidnapped from the universal base couldn't be let go. After Emochichi found Do Yunfan, the 2 of them were thinking of a way to save the other team members from the kidnappers. The situation of the other team was very intense. Chinyu covered her injured shoulder with one hand as she panted and ran forward. But her body was getting weaker and weaker. She leaned against a wall and looked back. The sweat and dust on her face stuck a few strands of her hair to her face, but she didn't have the mood to care. A ruthless light flashed in her eyes, and she immediately let go of the hand that was covering her wound and quickly left while holding the wall. Although the people chasing behind him were still far away, the distance between them wasn't safe either. Moreover, she was about to run out of strength, so she had to find a place to hide first. Although she was shot by the anesthetic needle, she did not immediately fall into a coma. She could still move, but her abilities seemed to have disappeared, and she could not release them. Of the 3 men chasing her, only one was a level 4 ability user. The other 2 were level 3. If it weren't for her ability being suppressed, she wouldn't have to be afraid of him. But now that she couldn't use her special ability, she could only escape. She knew what they were here for. They were from Skyfire Base, weren't they? They just wanted to get information about the Universal Base from the corpse hunters who had joined the Universal Base. Previously, Chinyu's team had encountered these people, but they did not agree to cooperate with them. Last time, the other party didn't use such a forceful method. Was he finally unable to endure it this time? Chinyu's footsteps were unstable as she ran forward. When she saw a shopping mall in front of her, she immediately ran over. There was a movie theater at the top of the mall. Maybe she could hide there. Chinyu thought her pursuers would soon catch up, but they were stopped. Looking at the sudden appearance of more than 100 zombies blocking the way, the 3 of them were a little confused. What's going on? Did the medicine we sprayed on ourselves wear off? Didn't we say we had half a month? One of the level 3 adepts asked. Are you blind? Can't you see that these zombies are covering their noses with one hand? The rank 4 metahuman snappily said. Oh, these zombies are covering their noses with their hands. These look like ordinary zombies, right? How could their IQ be so high? I saw it, but I can't believe it. The subordinate replied. Cut the crap, they're coming. The level 4 metahuman shouted, and immediately released his ability to attack the zombies that had begun to rush over. He attacked as he retreated. Damn it, that woman got away. The level 4 adept said, his expression a little angry. That woman was the captain. She must know more than the people they had captured. In the end, she managed to escape. Who would have thought that the needle didn't knock her down? And where did these zombies come from? They even thought of covering their noses to deal with the smell on their bodies. On the side of a 5-story building, a figure stood against the wall. This figure was a woman. Oh no, a female zombie. Because under her sunglasses was a pair of iconic black eyes without the scara. The female zombie was wearing a gray and black camouflage uniform. Her dry hair was tied into a low ponytail, and she wore a black baseball cap on her head. The ponytail just happened to come out from the back of the cap, hanging down her back. When the female zombie saw the fight below, her figure immediately flashed. She jumped down behind the three people, preparing to kill them from behind. Qingyu still didn't know that her pursuers had been blocked. At this time, she used the last bit of her sanity and strength to climb up the mall, found the movie theater, and then used the flashlight to find the door of the giant screen hall, and went in. Stumbling to the last row, she directly lay down in the corner. She couldn't think of anything else, and just fainted. She didn't even have time to bandage the wound on her arm. In the leader's office of Universal Base No. 2, Lin Xiao listened to Xie Dong's report about the recent disappearances of the zombie hunters, and smiled coldly. It seemed that Li Jingye was finally willing to take action. This time, he actually sent 3,000 soldiers to capture people. Did they think the Universal Base could capture them as they pleased? She calmly continued to read through the documents and said, "Keep an eye on their retreat. Don't let them have a chance to send the information back." Understood. Xie Dong nodded. He sent out 300 level 4 zombies and 50 level 5 zombies to form a zombie army. They were divided into 3 groups, one to keep an eye on the outsiders' retreat, another to keep an eye on their main camp. The last group was to disrupt their hunt. So the zombies that appeared near Emochichi and Qinyu's group were sent by Xie Dong. Skyfire's 3,000 troops were camped in a well-hidden hotel building about 10 kilometers away from the Universal Base. The tanks were hidden in the underground parking lot, and the soldiers were hiding in the hotel rooms. If Lin Xiao hadn't sent people to keep an eye on Skyfire Base, they wouldn't have discovered the army so quickly. Chapter 991. It had been half a month since little Tung Tung was born. Even though she had been absorbing energy every night, Lin Xiao's zombie core had only recovered to 30%. She still needed more time to recover. Her attack power was not low, but 30% of the zombie core's energy was not enough for her to fight for long. However, she did not intend to take action personally. At least, she did not need to take action against the 3,000 human soldiers. Lin Xiao took out a piece of paper, drawing and scribbling as he pointed to the restaurant where Skyfire's forces were located. "They have a lot of troops here, but they've sent their adepts out to catch the hunters. Why don't you gather the ordinary zombies in the area and send a rank 5 leader to stop the rank 5 adepts from coming back to regroup with the main force? Then you can lead the zombie tide to take over the hotel. Is there a problem?" Xie Dong looked at her drawing and shook his head. "It's not a big problem." Lin Xiao nodded, leaned back in his chair and said, "Then go." After Xie Dong left, Lin Xiao looked at the baby lying on the sofa out of habit. Tung Tung had fallen asleep again. He always fell asleep easily, and was not afraid of the noise. On the other side, in a hotel building 50 kilometers away from Skyfire Base. This was originally a 5-star hotel. The building was very luxurious, and the underground parking lot was huge. After Doomsday, this place had been empty, and no one had come here. The plants around the hotel were either mutated or dead. The mutated vines crawled all over the exterior of the hotel, and the plants in the garden of the hotel were also growing crazily. Originally, there were a lot of zombies in this area, but at this time, the hotel was quiet and empty. There was not even a shadow of a ghost, let alone a shadow of a zombie. In one of the rooms of the hotel, a man stood by the window, smoking a cigarette. He was the commander of this operation, Huang Chengfeng, a 32-year-old man. He looked rough, with thick eyebrows and big eyes. His thin lips were pressed into a straight line, and his facial features exuded a barbaric air. Huang Chengfeng was neither tall nor short, about the height of a normal man. But the camouflage uniform on his body was stretched out by the muscles inside, giving him a sense of power. He shook the cigarette in his hand out of the window, and the ash fell to the ground. A subordinate wearing the same camouflage uniform came in. "Boss, we haven't found the 2 women." Huang Qingfeng's expression darkened. The air pressure around him turned cold. He snorted and said, "You're too useless. You can't even catch 2 women. The subordinate said. They are all level 5 paranormals, Huang Qingfeng said coldly. We already caught him, but he still managed to escape. What do you think? Did she think that she could let her guard down just because she was a woman? Do you think a woman who dares to leave the base to hunt zombies is easy to deal with? The subordinate could only lower his head and shut his mouth. Huang Qingfeng threw away the cigarette, but in his hand angrily. TSK, they are obviously 2 good-looking women. I thought I could get rid of some meat, but I didn't expect him to escape. Huang Qingfeng and the others rarely touched women's bodies. When they came here and found out that there were 2 groups of targets with women, and they heard that they looked quite young, they immediately had some thoughts. In the end, he ran away before he even saw him. After a moment of silence, Huang Qingfeng asked, When will the first batch of people arrive? The subordinate said, He's already on his way back. Huang Qingfeng was so angry that his lungs hurt. He scolded. Nonsense, of course I know they're on their way back. If they're not on their way back, are they going to spend the winter here? Where am I asking? How far is it? How long will it take for them to arrive? The subordinate immediately replied, Oh, it's still more than 10 kilometers away. It'll take about 10 to 20 minutes. Huang Qingfeng immediately waved his men away. All right, send someone out to receive them. Don't let anything happen again. Especially if those 2 women are in the same group. Keep a close eye on them. I'm waiting for those 2 women to come and rescue them. Speaking of this, a cold smile appeared on his face. Ran away? It doesn't matter. Their team members are still here. When they arrive, they won't be afraid that they won't come to rescue them. At this moment, a soldier in charge of keeping watch on the roof of the hotel suddenly put down his binoculars. He looked puzzled and hesitant. He raised the binoculars to his eyes again and took a look. He then waved his hand to beckon his comrade who was not far away. Lao San, come here for a moment. Another soldier who was more than 10 meters away from him turned around and looked at him. He habitually asked, What's wrong? Although he asked this, he had already turned around and walked over. The soldier holding the binoculars said, Come over and take a look. There seems to be some movement 500 meters away. The soldier who walked over turned around and looked in the direction where he was holding the binoculars. It was a little far, and he couldn't see anything. What movement? The soldier holding the binoculars handed him the binoculars, raised his hand, and pointed in a direction. He said, Look over there. It's about 500 meters away. It's at the bar. The soldier who walked over took the binoculars and looked at it. He saw a green street in the image. There were 2 rows of landscape trees planted in the middle of the road. They had already mutated. There were shops and bars on both sides of the road. Apart from the dense leaves and the shops and buildings that occasionally peeked out from the leaves, there was nothing else to be seen. What did you see? He asked in confusion. Look carefully. The second soldier took a serious look again. Suddenly, he saw some swaying figures on the road between the leaves and the shops. As soon as he saw their unnatural gait and twisted limbs, he knew what it was. They weren't people, they were zombies. It wasn't strange to see zombies at the end of the world. What was strange was that these zombies were squeezed together in groups. It was like a large army approaching them. Each of them had been sprayed with the gas to isolate the zombies. With so many people squeezing together, the smell was even stronger. Originally, half of the zombies here had been killed by them. Now it was impossible for zombies to be willing to come here. I'll go find the captain. You continue to watch. The soldier holding the binoculars fiercely stuffed the binoculars into his companion's hands. He left a sentence and turned around in a hurry. The remaining soldier took the binoculars and looked again. Sure enough, it wasn't his eyes that were playing tricks on him. There really was a large number of zombies coming this way. Looking at the more and more zombies that appeared over there, he saw that there were dozens of them from the gaps between the leaves and the buildings. What about the places that he couldn't see? How many would there be? Not long after, familiar footsteps immediately came from behind. Their captain came. There are really zombies coming this way. The captain came up and directly took the binoculars to look. Chapter 992. The team leader, who was called to the rooftop, looked at it with the binoculars for a while. His expression changed and he looked around. He held the binoculars for a full 30 seconds. After looking around for a while, he finally put down the binoculars and gave them to his subordinate. Without saying anything, he turned around and left quickly. Huang Qingfeng was waiting for the hunter squad to come back with the captives. Suddenly, he saw the team leader who was in charge of the surrounding area rushing down. "Report, there's an emergency." "What's the hurry?" Huang Qingfeng looked at him and asked. The team leader said, "The area within a 500-meter radius of the hotel is surrounded by zombies. There are zombies all around, and the number is estimated to be no less than 3,000. They're coming towards us." Huang Qingfeng frowned. When he frowned, his face was filled with ferocity. He asked, "What did you say? We're surrounded by zombies? And they're coming over?" The team leader nodded and said with certainty, "Yes, they're coming towards us. There's a lot of them, but they're very quiet. I suspect there might be high-level zombies." Huang Qingfeng didn't believe it, but his subordinate wouldn't lie about the information. He thought that the other party must have confirmed it before telling him. He was puzzled and said, "Impossible. Are you sure?" The team leader put his feet together and saluted him. He said solemnly, "Report. I've looked for a few seconds to confirm it. It won't take me more than a few seconds to be dazzled." And the guards on the rooftop saw it. Huang Qingfeng immediately turned around, picked up the binoculars on the table beside him, and strode out of the room. He ran up to the top of the building. When he reached the top, he only took a glance with the binoculars and immediately gave an order. "Everyone prepare for battle. Bring out the tanks and aim in all directions." As soon as he gave the order, the soldiers who were originally staying in the various rooms of the hotel quickly swarmed out. They carried their guns and cannons and circled around the hotel building to find shelter. The muzzles of the cannons were all set up and aimed outside. These zombies moved very slowly, walking a few hundred meters at a leisurely pace. Huang Qingfeng looked for a while on the rooftop, and his face turned gloomy. Because the roads around the hotel were all blocked by zombies, he could jump over the roofs of the surrounding buildings and leave, but his army could not. Let the soldiers spray the zombie isolating agent on their bodies, then concentrate on this path and rush out. Huang Qingfeng said as he pointed at one of the paths, then jumped down from the roof. Fire! In a flash, Huang Qingfeng landed beside the cannoneer soldier at the bottom of the path that Huang Qingfeng had just pointed out, and immediately gave the order. After giving this order, he immediately turned his head and shouted, "Get in the car and move!" After he gave the order, the gunner next to him immediately aimed and fired. Boom! There was an explosion and a cloud of black smoke rose. Half of the zombies on the opposite road were blown up, but there were still more coming from the back. At this time, a mournful zombie roar suddenly sounded. Roar-attack. After the order to attack was issued, the originally slow-moving zombies suddenly changed their mode. They suddenly became crazy and rushed forward with their claws and fangs. Release again. Huang Qingfeng frowned and ordered again. Boom! There was another explosion. Another group of zombies were blown up. At this time, the vehicles in the underground parking lot drove up, honking and driving towards the road where Huang Qingfeng was. "Get in the car." After seeing the vehicles, Huang Qingfeng immediately asked the soldiers outside to get in. In addition to the vehicles, there were also military trucks coming from the back. At this time, 3 modified off-road vehicles that were more than 10 kilometers away heard the explosion and immediately stopped. What's going on? Is there a battle at the hotel? And isn't the movement a bit too big? Did the commander and the others encounter a situation? I don't know, but they must have encountered it. A person got out of the first vehicle, looked around, then jumped to the top of a tall building, and looked in the direction of the hotel. There were indeed several clouds of thick smoke rising, and it was spreading in one direction, as if the firepower had shifted. The person jumped down from the top of the building and landed on the roof of the car and said, "Let's go and have a look first. The firepower there is very strong. I don't know what happened. We need to get closer to know." The 3 vehicles immediately drove forward, but not long after they suddenly stopped. because there was a group of zombies standing quietly on the road in front. There were at least 100 of them blocking the road. Damn! Why are there so many zombies blocking this road? Why does it look like they are waiting for us? The driver of the first vehicle stepped on the brake, looked at the group of zombies 70 to 80 meters away, and stared in disbelief. Look up. There are 2 people standing on the roof of the next building. Suddenly, the person in the co-driver's seat stuck his head out of the window and pointed to a building above. The man who was originally standing on the roof also saw the 2 figures on the roof at this time, but the aura coming from the 2 figures was very strong. At this time, the people in the 3 vehicles felt an irresistible sense of oppression shrouding them. At this time, suddenly one of the 2 people disappeared. Before they could react, there was a sudden bang sound on the roof, and then the person on the roof was thrown down. The man who was thrown out of the car was stunned when he rolled on the ground, but when he looked up and saw a pair of black eyes without the scara, the hair on his body immediately stood up. This is a zombie. He was thrown down by the zombie, and then was pressed under it. He believed that this zombie could open its mouth and bite him in the next second. Just when this thought flashed in the man's mind, and at the same time his body instinctively wanted to struggle, suddenly a wet touch brushed past his face. When he reacted, he found that his face was smeared with the zombie's saliva. This zombie did not bite him, but used its tongue to brush his face. It was like an animal marking its prey. Damn! Aren't you a zombie? Shouldn't you bite him? You're not a dog, why are you licking? Just when the man was stunned by the saliva licking his face, the remaining figure on the distant roof also disappeared. In the blink of an eye appeared on the roof of the first vehicle, and said to the zombie that licked him with a face that could not bear to look at, "Why are you licking? Bite him to death. Bite." After Alu finished speaking, he felt very tired. He didn't know where the leader found this audio. There was simply a big hole in his brain. He didn't listen to what was said, didn't remember when he heard it, and didn't do it when he remembered it. Jumping on people and licking them, not distinguishing between friend and foe, what's wrong with him? You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.